I'm meteorologist Jennifer Wojcicki. We'll see sunny skies here this afternoon with a high into the mid-60s. Winds out of the northeast around 5 to 10 miles per hour. And for tonight, mostly clear with a low around 47. By Saturday, sunshine, a high of 74 degrees. Sunday, plenty of blue skies and sun, a high of 74. Monday, mostly sunny, high of 81. That's your latest Chicago weather update. Currently, it's 63.
You're the only voice of reason on the radio.
You give me hope.
Having listened to you every day.
Thank you for your clear insight.
Always felt a little bit smarter.
I listen to you every single day. I keep coming back to this station, and thank you for what you do.
On WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Because facts matter. You're listening to WCPT 820.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. My name is William Muck, and I'm delighted to be back filling in for Joan today. As many of you know, I'm a political science professor at North Central College out in Naperville. I've been interviewed multiple times on Joan's show, and I've hosted now, I believe this is my 11th time filling in, so it's starting to feel normal. So we have a great show lined up for you today. For the first half hour or so, I'm going to talk through some interesting political developments that I've been thinking about lately and offer a few thoughts about what's going on more broadly. At 2:15, because it's Friday, we'll open up those phone lines and text lines and keep them open until 3:30, so we can hear all your voices and have a nice conversation there. Starting at 3:30, we have got a great lineup of guests. We're beginning with Aaron Kleinman, who is the Director of Research at the States Project. This is an organization that is paying attention to what state legislatures are doing, specifically thinking about how to address the shortfall that Democrats have faced in state legislatures across the country. And Aaron in particular is putting together a database looking at the types of legislation that we're seeing move through these state legislatures. And it's some really, really fascinating data and will make for excellent conversation. Then following Aaron, we've got Mike Nellis, who's a former senior advisor to Kamala Harris and founder and CEO of The Authentic, Chicago-based political fundraising and consulting firm. And I want him on because I want to pick his brain about where the Democratic Party needs to be on strategy. Where are they? Where they need to be. There's lots of ongoing conversation about how do you confront the Republican Party, Donald Trump right now, and what are the best strategies for all of that. So Mike is going to chat with us about that. Then at 4 o'clock, and I'm really, really excited about 4 o'clock, we've got Gal Beckerman. He's going to join us, and he's a staff writer at The Atlantic. And he has an article out this week comparing Donald Trump to Henry Kissinger, thinking about the role of morality in foreign policy. Really, really thoughtful piece. He also has a book looking at the role of ideas and social movements and the proper space you have to have for those social movements really to take off. So some really, really deep ideas there. Then at 4:30, we're going to wrap up the show with my colleague and American politics expert, Professor Suzanne Chod. And we're going to talk about the balance of power between Congress or the legislative branch and the executive branch, really thinking through what we're seeing, how to understand this in more historic terms. It's very, very clear that the Congress is ceding power to the executive branch. And what I want to talk about is how that is different from other periods and how we move forward, how we understand the nature of that threat it poses. So some really, really interesting guests, some good conversation. I'm also really looking forward to walking through all the things that you're most interested in talking about. But before we dive into all of that, I wanted to take a moment to reflect on the WCPT 20th anniversary celebration last Saturday. Many of you were there. I was there. Many more of you were listening to it. It was such a wonderful day, and for so many reasons. And I was struck by a couple things, and I thought I would share just a few thoughts about that event and what it caused me to think about. So the first was the depth, breadth, and nuance of the conversation over the 4+ hours. You know, there were politicians, community members, academics, and of course, all of WCPT's talented hosts. And while they were all united in a progressive vision of the world, there was still a refreshing and fascinating diversity of views on display. And as an academic who loves and really lives for that type of dialogue, I found it to be so intellectually engaging. The conversation throughout was anything but surface level. The guests and the hosts were pushing into the weeds and having what I thought to be really important and thoughtful discussions. And that was really something, given that it was the fast-paced nature of events, and you had a lot of people coming in and out, and it really stood out there. And I will say I was particularly struck by Mayor Brandon Johnson. I'd not had the chance to be in the same room with the mayor and listen to him directly. And while I fully understand that there is a wide range of views and reactions to the mayor and his policies, and let's just say that is a good thing, right? That's what democracy is about. We should have space for pushback and agreement and disagreement. I nevertheless found him to be deeply thoughtful and genuine. So much of our time these days are spent watching the president who has no interest or connection to the truth, or exploring the complexities of the issues we as a country face, or to respond to a real question. But Mayor Johnson did all of the above. He didn't shy away from hard questions, and he demonstrated a level of seriousness and sophistication that whatever one's view on the mayor might be, they had to appreciate. The other really, really oppressive voice, and again, there were many, was Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton. Wow. I mean, I have no idea how that Illinois race for the open Senate seat is going to shake up, who's going to jump in, all of that. But there is no doubt that the lieutenant governor will be a force to be reckoned with. I was on the air at the table when she joined, and I just was so impressed with her ability to connect the dots, to see the way in which various issues feed off of each other. And I thought to myself as I was sitting there, I need to keep my mouth shut and let her keep talking because I felt like I was really, really learning a lot from her. And I think the emptiness of so many of our politicians at the national level has left me craving some genuine political discourse and some politicians with real talent and heft. And boy, Stratton has that. And so the WCPT event reminded me that they're still out there. The other thing that struck me about the event was the sense of community the event created. And that's something that I certainly have been missing, and I'm guessing something that you, our listeners, have also been missing too. Our current political environment can leave one feel deeply lonely, disconnected from a world that doesn't seem to make sense, and it's oftentimes is difficult to watch. So many politicians seem to celebrate the suffering of others, embracing cruelty as a badge of honor. It's hard to find common cause and connection with that type of politics. Yet being in the same room with so many people who want a better world and who are willing to fight for that better world was deeply rewarding and just a powerful sense of community. I felt a deep connection to the people at that event, the ideas they were grappling with, as well as the broader WCPT audience. To all of you, it gave me hope that things can be better, and that's a hard thing to find these days. And I think it's also a reason to stay active and why we need to join together to push back in a massive wave of civic uprising. I think that's the moment that we are in right now. Really fighting for our democracy, but also finding a sense of community in that effort. Right. So I felt better being around other people who are thinking about the danger that our democracy is facing these days. So you know what the entire event was? It was chicken soup for the progressive soul. That's how I felt about all of it. So the other thing that was interesting is I bought a T-shirt, and I was so happy to see that the T-shirt was made in the United States, union made. I mean, those are really, really interesting things. And I think as we look at Donald Trump and the way in which all of his goods and services are built, made elsewhere, it was interesting. It was impressive to see that. The other big news of the last day or so is that we have a new pope. Yesterday, the world witnessed the white smoke indicating the Catholic Church has selected a new pope, the first North American pope, a man from Chicago, a South Side pope. It's been fun to watch the city and especially the city's Catholic community celebrate the selection of Pope Leo XIV. And while the pope isn't inherently a political position, it would be impossible not to ponder the political implications of the election of this particular pope. So it's very, very early in the game, and we should be cautious about any prediction. It does seem that Pope Leo shares many of the core characteristics and general philosophy of his predecessor, Pope Francis. In the nonstop coverage, we may have learned quite a bit. We learned quite a bit about the new pope. He's devoted much of his life to mission work for the poor. He spent nearly 2 decades in Peru doing just such work. He was described often yesterday as a deeply humble man, someone committed to social justice. I saw his 2 brothers interviewed from Chicago and one in Florida yesterday, and they were pretty hilarious. They're like, he's just a regular guy, right? He's just a normal guy, but he cares deeply about the most vulnerable in the world. And I think that sets up a really fascinating and stark contrast with the current president. A president who has openly embraced isolationism, nationalism. He's taken a chainsaw to U.S. global aid efforts. Trump has made clear his indifference to the suffering of others around the world, to the vulnerable around the world. It's all America first, and they are open in saying that. In fact, his vice president, J.D. Vance, has openly argued that Christian doctrine supports the idea of putting your country ahead of others. Now, interestingly, there's a social media account under the Pope's name, and over the last couple of months, it has repeatedly criticized the Trump administration, and especially J.D. Vance, for that position. The account shared an article from a liberal-leaning Catholic newspaper titled, J.D. Vance is Wrong. Jesus doesn't ask us to rank our love for others. I think the reaction and the outpouring of support for this new pope is a reaction to our general thirst for compassion. We have a presidential administration that is celebrating the targeting of those who they see as outsiders. An administration that's cutting billions in aid for those who are suffering. And I think what we're seeing with this new pope is potentially some pushback, right? Some opportunity to reset our moral compass. Now, I don't think that the new pope or the Vatican as a whole is going to be overly political, but I do believe they are going to be talking about immigration. And then the fact that the pope is originally from America will force us to have that conversation about what is morally acceptable. How should we treat those, citizens and non-citizens alike? So in general, I think the selection of the new pope is exciting for Chicago, but I hope it also helps us lead on a better path for those conversations about immigration. All right, we need to take a break. We will be right back, where we're going to talk about dolls and due process.
Out Chicago.
How are you doing,
I am
Ellen Miller?
immersing myself in as many positive experiences, i.e. theater, music, whatever I can do.
Look, I keep going back to doing your joy homework.
Yes.
During this point, joy is a practice. And you have to actively seek out the things that bring you joy.
Catch Out Chicago every Sunday, 11 to 1 on WCPT 820.
This is a WCPT Veteran Minute. In the midst of World War II, a group of Native American soldiers known as the Code Talkers became silent heroes. The U.S. military faced challenge of secure communications on the battlefield, and these men, primarily from the Navajo tribe, were enlisted to develop an unbreakable code. Using their native language, which had no written alphabet, they transmitted vital messages that were indecipherable to enemy forces. The code proved to be an essential asset, particularly in the Pacific Theater, where it helped the Allies win crucial battles. The Code Talkers' courage and ingenuity saved countless lives and turned the tide of the war. Yet, their contributions remained largely unknown until decades later. The legacy of the Code Talkers stands as a testament to the strength, resilience, and valuable service of Native Americans during one of America's most devastating conflicts. This has been a WCPT Veteran Minute.
Hey Google, play WCPT.
Streaming Chicago's progressive talk from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to WCPT and Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. We've been talking about the political implications of the new pope. But before we get back to talking politics, let's open those phone lines. And so, Lady B, we have a new sponsor here, the Credo mobile phone and text line. That number is 773-763-9278. Credo Mobile, a progressive phone company that is better for all people and the planet. Again, 773-763-9278. We can talk about anything that's on your mind. I always like to provide a little inspiration. I'm in the classroom. Sometimes you need to get some ideas out there to get the creative juices flowing. So let's put some ideas. You can talk about your thoughts on Trump's first 100 plus days, better or worse than you thought. We just learned yesterday that President Trump is announcing that he will appoint Fox News host Jeanine Pirro as interim attorney for the District of Columbia. President Trump also withdrew the nomination of his initial nominee for Surgeon General after the right-wing provocateur Laura Loomer criticized her and then replaced that pick with Dr. Casey Means, who has close ties to Health and Human Services, RFK, and who Trump said has impeachable or impeccable, maybe impeachable, I don't know, Maha credentials. We also had the passing today of a former Supreme Court Justice, David Souter. There's really a lot of interesting things to think about his legacy. Trump's executive order to open Alcatraz. Kristi Noem was in Chicago and been doing lots of things, so there's a lot to talk about there as well. And if you don't normally call into the show, or maybe you're a first-time caller, I encourage you to pick up that phone. Later in the show, we're going to be talking to Gal Beckerman, who I mentioned, and one of the things that we're going to be chatting about is the importance of conversation and dialogue. His book is about the importance of these conversations and how conversations are so important to the success of social movements. So again, if you've got a thought or idea, perspective, you want to chat or share a text, please go pick up that phone, 773-763-9278. All right, before we get to the callers, I want to talk about dolls and maybe some due process. President Trump was interviewed on Meet the Press this last week and offered some pretty telling remarks on dolls and due process. Let's start with the dolls. In justifying his tariffs, he's acknowledged that there may be fewer dolls on the shelf. And he suggests, you know what, that's just fine. Why Trump decided to make dolls his example, I don't know. I honestly think it's really, really dumb politics, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's listen to that first clip about dolls and specifically how many dolls he thinks little girls need. Lady B, can we play that clip?
You were at your cabinet meeting. You said, quote, I'm going to quote what you said, maybe the children will have 2 dolls instead of 30 dolls.
Yeah.
And maybe the 2 dolls will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally. Are you saying that your tariffs will cause some prices to go up?
No, I think the tariffs are going to be great for us because it's going to make us rich.
But you said some dolls are going to cost more. Isn't that an acknowledgement that some prices will go up?
I don't think a beautiful baby girl that's 11 years old needs to have 30 dolls. I think they can have 3 dolls or 4 dolls because what we were doing with China was just unbelievable. We had a trade deficit of hundreds of billions of dollars with China.
When you say they could have 3 dolls instead of 30 dolls, are you saying Americans could see empty store shelves?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying they don't need to have 30 dolls. They can have 3. They don't need to have 250 pencils. They can have 5.
There's so much to break down there. First, just as a side note, it's just weird that Trump talks about a beautiful baby girl who is 11 playing. I mean, that's weird and creepy and odd. If Joe Biden had said something that odd and creepy, for weeks we would have been having conversation about his mental acuity. But let's leave that one for the moment. And let's think about the contrast of that message that you don't need 30 dolls. You only need 2 or 3 dolls. And you know, 5 pencils is more than enough. Let's compare that to the rhetoric he was using on the campaign trail. So at a campaign rally in Grand Rapids, again, during the presidential campaign, Trump promised, quote, your paychecks will be higher, your streets will be safer and cleaner, your communities will be richer, and your future as an American will be much better than it has ever been when I get in, because this will be the golden age of America. So Trump promised a golden age of America. He did that repeatedly throughout the campaign. Now suddenly he's talking about the reality that kids will only need 2 or 3 dolls. And let's not forget the pencil remark, 5 pencils. Not only does that depart from Trump's long-term rhetoric, but also from the historically upbeat language that we see in American politics. Herbert Hoover campaigned with promises of a chicken in every pot and a car in every garage. You know, Ronald Reagan welcomed Morning in America. And politicians from Theodore Roosevelt to Richard Nixon have vowed to bring prosperity to America. And Trump is now making arguments about the emptiness of overconsumption. Now, there's no doubt that there is a legitimate conversation to be had about how much we consume and how many things we have and are we overconsuming. You know, we should be thinking about the role that consumption plays in our life. But you know who shouldn't be making that argument? Donald Trump, who represents the most unrepentant example of overconsumption possible. The guy wants to sell you everything. The guy loves gold, and he's filled the White House with gold. Speaking of which, if you paid attention to what the White House looks like these days, he literally is filling it with more and more gold-plated accents. The Washington Post had an article this week where they talked about that we're witnessing a president transition from prosperity to austerity, right? That is such a dramatic thing. And the reality is this is the economic fallout from tariffs. This is the reality that we're looking, and they realize this. They realize that we're not going to have enough dolls, and we're not going to have enough pencils. There is likely to be a shortage. And why is that the case? Because of the decision of Donald Trump. Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent went on Fox News to try to clean this all up, but I really think he only made it worse. So you're going to hear in this clip that he thinks all these tariffs are going to make us better off. I want us to think about that. Lady B, let's play that clip.
The other thing, too, is this reporter behind me was quite snarky the other day when President Trump talked about the girl having two dolls. And he said, well, what? President didn't take the question, but he said, what would you tell that girl? I said, I would tell that young girl that you will have a better life than your parents, that you and your family, thanks to President Trump, can now be confident again that you will have a better life than your parents, which working class Americans had abandoned that idea. Your family will own a home. You will be able to advance. You will have a good education. You will have economic freedom. That's what we are advancing.
I listen to that and I find myself wondering, what goal are they really pursuing with these tariffs? And I'm serious about that. Is the goal less stuff? I mean, is that what they want? Do they want us to have less stuff? Do they want us to reduce consumption? If so, how does that really make life better for Americans? I get the overconsumption argument. I mean, Jimmy Carter made that argument years ago. But that's not what they care about. And the globalized world of trade has made our lives so much better in so many ways, right? Access to goods and services, products, right? I mean, the reality is that we are much better off with a globalized world. That doesn't mean you can't rethink some of the rules of trade and making them more fair and thinking about all of that. There are a lot of conversations to be had, but that's not what they're arguing for. And again, where's the goal to bring manufacturing back? Does Trump really want us to be making toys? Does he want us to be making products here? Is he trying to shift the American economy to one in which, we're working all in factories? And what's interesting with that is the polling suggests that, well, many Americans would like to see more manufacturing jobs come back to the United States. Most Americans don't want to work in those jobs, right? So there's an interesting contrast there. This really strikes me as a golden opportunity for Democrats. All Democrats should be talking about is that Trump wants to take your dolls away from you. Republicans are really good about sticking to simple talking points, and it strikes me that Trump has handed the Democrats a golden ticket, right? Really run with this argument. So dolls. All right, now let's quickly talk about due process. The other interesting point to come out of the interview on Meet the Press was Trump's view on due process and the Constitution, specifically whether individuals, citizens and non-citizens alike, are entitled to due process. And secondly, whether he, as the president, needs to uphold the Constitution. These are easy questions, and the answer to both is yes. Citizens and non-citizens alike are entitled to due process. That's what a country of laws and not men requires. And yes, as a president, you take an oath to uphold the Constitution. Lady B, let's listen to that clip as well.
Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
Well, the Fifth Amendment says.
I don't know. It seems it might say that, but if you're talking about that, then we'd have to have 1 million or 2 million or 3 million trials. We have thousands of people that are some murderers and some drug dealers and some of the worst people on earth. Some of the worst, most dangerous people on earth. And I was elected to get them the hell out of here, and the courts are holding me from doing it.
But even given those numbers that you're talking about, don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know. I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me, and they are going to obviously follow what the Supreme Court said. What you said is not what I heard the Supreme Court said. They have a different interpretation.
All right. So to both the question of whether due process is required and does he have to uphold the Constitution, he says, I don't know. And again, that's not the right answer. These are not hard questions. There's not, complex legal arguments here. Yes, you must uphold the Constitution. And yes, everyone is entitled to due process, right? That's what the Fifth Amendment says. So when he's asked about the Fifth Amendment, when the reporter says it says that, he says it might say that. No, that's not okay. The Fifth Amendment's due process clause prohibits the federal government from depriving anyone of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The text literally says that. No person shall be, and I'm quoting here directly from the text, quote, deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. This is why we want a government of laws and not of men. These are very, very clear answers. And the fact that he is saying, I don't know, should really, really trouble and concern us. All right, we got to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to open those phone lines and take some calls. We'll see you soon.
Count on Kohl's for those special gifts Mom deserves this Mother's Day. Inspire her inner chef with must-haves for her kitchen, wellness essentials for her fitness routine, and jewelry for her perfect night out. Plus, you can save 15% on some of your finds and earn Kohl's Cash. Find Mom's perfect gift in time for Mother's Day at Kohl's and Kohl's.com. Select styles. Offer valid through May 11th. Kohl's Cash and coupons do not apply to Sephora. Exclusions apply. See store or Kohl's.com for more details.
WCPT replay.
We can't just be, thinking about where we're going to move to. We got to move into the mental state of fighting back, keeping our cool, keeping our calm, and hoping that Republicans grow a spine, because it's all on them. It's all on them right now. Mm-hmm. We had no say over these nominees to the cabinet post, these loyalists that have been thrown into the positions without the necessary experience other than fealty to
bending the knee.
Bending the knee. So,
yep.
But I've been trying.
I thought they were all upset about taking the knee.
Yeah,
they were. They were mad about taking the knee.
Yeah, when Colin Kaepernick was taking the knee.
They were not taking the knee.
They were not too happy about that.
Okay, cool.
But I've been trying to, Scott, immerse myself in the positive, because we can't be mired down by everything we're seeing around us. We have to keep
otherwise you will go cookie pants.
We'll go cookie pants.
Keep listening to WCPT 820, because facts matter.
You are listening to WCPT 820. Here's the latest Chicago weather update.
From the Weatherology Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Jennifer Wojcicki. We'll see sunny skies here this afternoon with a high into the mid-60s. Winds out of the northeast around 5 to 10 miles per hour. And for tonight, mostly clear with a low around 47. By Saturday, sunshine, a high of 74 degrees. Sunday, plenty of blue skies and sun, a high of 74. Monday, mostly sunny, high of 81. That's your latest Chicago weather update. Currently, it's 63.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Because that's how we roll. Welcome back to WCPT. We have the phone lines, the Credo Mobile phone lines open. And that text line and call line is 773-763-9278. Credo Mobile, a progressive phone company that is better for all people on the planet. I also want to remind everybody of the voicemail line. This is a really, really great opportunity here. So as WCPT celebrates 20 years on the air, we want to hear your story. Now, this is a different number than the phone line. This is 773-467-8202. And you can call in and leave a voicemail. We'll be playing some of the messages on the air. That number again, 773-467-8202. You can leave a comment there about today's show or whatever happens to be on your mind. Just a wonderful way to share your story and your perceptions of experience with WCPT. So, all right, let's get to the phone lines. We've got Jim from Chicago who wants to talk about Kristi Noem. Hey, Jim, how are you? Welcome to WCPT again.
Hi, Professor. Kristi Noem on our taxpayer dime went down to Springfield, and she brings up the case of a 21-year-old girl who was murdered. Well, that elicited a response from their family right after she said it, as if they were completely surprised by it. They said, my daughter is a wonderful person, and so I had to go for a couple of paragraphs of explaining their daughter's life. Apparently, Kristi Noem didn't even contact this family. Didn't even give him a heads up that she was going to use to murder their daughter in Springfield.
That's terrible.
But that's an example of this administration. They don't even think about the sensitivities of other individuals. I mean, that's just a perfect case of it. Who would I bring up something that I might hurt the feelings of somebody without contacting the person, but she did it. And she also had 10 stooges behind her, Professor, that I don't know where she dug them up at, but they look like, the lineup at 26th and Cal. But anyway, it was astounding. It was astounding to see that. To listen to this response immediately from the bereaved family.
Well, yeah.
Incredible.
Well, and so much of, I will say all politics is performative, right? I get that's part of politics, but some of it can be so hurtful and so indifferent, right? I'm glad you're bringing this up because the Democratic Party was on top of this. The Democratic Party of Illinois sent out a message immediately after being critical of exactly the sort of things that you were talking about. That she flew in and out of Springfield, was only in there, 27 minutes. It was a really, really short event, jumping from one location to another, and she was dodging protesters. And, that's not real politics. It's not engaging with the people. It's not having real conversation. It's performative. And like you said, it's indifferent to those people that she's dealing with or referencing.
But are they performing for the 75 million people, the 75 million MAGA supporters? Is that who she's performing for? Because she certainly isn't performing for the whole United States of America. She should be speaking for the whole United States of America. She's being paid to do that, not for the 75 million people that voted for Trump. What about the hundreds of millions that didn't?
Absolutely.
I would consider, if you went to work, would you parse out half of the people and then ignore the other half? That's insane. Anyway, you have a good weekend, Professor. Thank you much.
Thank you so much, Jim, for calling in. And no, and I think the Kristi Noem, I will say another thing that sort of shook me was yesterday. I was watching the 5:30 news, and of course, all the news was about the new Pope and sort of telling us about the new Pope, who he is, and talking about his Chicago connections and the social justice, his focus on the most vulnerable. It clearly is part of who he is as a person. And one thing that just struck me is that the ad that was played right before they went to the 5:30 news on ABC was this ad that Kristi Noem has out where they're targeting and talking about illegals. And I actually pulled some of the text there just to talk about this, right? So this is right before the Pope comes on and they talk about all the things. The ad itself warns, and describes the individual as criminal, illegal aliens and threatens them not to come to America. She says this. She says, "Thank you, President Donald Trump, for securing our border and putting America first. President Trump has a clear message. If you are here illegally, we will find you and deport you. If you are a criminal alien considering entering America illegally, don't even think about it. If you come here and break our laws, we will hunt you down. Criminals are not welcome in the United States." And so there was that message. And then we went to the message of the new Pope. And again, it was hard to miss the stark contrast there in those messages. Should we care about the vulnerable? And to Jim's point, that's propaganda, that's performative. That's not necessary, and that's not what a good democracy does, going up and targeting those individuals who are most vulnerable. And I was just really, really struck by that contrast that the Trump administration is running that ad just as we begin to talk about the new Pope. So thanks, Jim, for calling. Really, really appreciate that. All right, next up is Steve from the Gold Coast. Hey, Steve, good to chat with you again.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for taking my call. And I couldn't agree with you more with regard to the politics versus the policy. So on the one hand, you talk about bad messaging, especially in terms of your base. The American conservative movement does not want to hear, hey, turn down your thermostat and put on a sweater, i.e. the Jimmy Carter line. They want a way that we're going to continue to consume like we've always consumed. I want to drive a big SUV and I want to live in a big house and I want to buy conspicuously. Donald Trump is not reading the room here. If his message is buy less and do with less, And as you pointed out, and rightfully so, Americans, about 500,000 of these manufacturing jobs are currently going empty because people don't want them. Yes. So this idea that, hey, we're going to bring back manufacturing, okay, well, it seems to be all right in the abstract when you think somebody else is going to do that job, but you don't want it, clearly. So, who are these people? And beyond that, if you're going to bring back a factory to the United States, that factory that used to employ 20,000, 30,000 people 50 years ago is not going to employ a few hundred. We're going to need more education. And robotics and artificial intelligence and so much else is going to be doing that work. And it's not going to be in Michigan or Illinois or New York and other places that have strong, workers' rights laws, strong unions, collective bargaining. So, I mean, I'm not sure, because the whole notion of bringing back manufacturing is because it's associated with a higher standard of living during a particular time frame in American history. It's not so that we can bring back manufacturing so you can make as much as you do picking vegetables in America.
Right.
So, I mean, this is the problem with this, because nobody's talking about ensuring that if we bring back manufacturing, we're going to be paying people a decent wage. No, we'll bring back manufacturing and somehow magically all of you will be making what your grandfather did at GM in Detroit in 1965.
Right.
No, I'm sorry, no.
He's stuck in this mentality of looking back in time, right? This is, again, I guess it's sort of the mantra of a Make America Great Back. He's looking back when manufacturing did provide that type of income, but that's not the case anymore. And the other thing that strikes me is he's so indifferent. You know, somebody asked him a question yesterday. They brought up that, the ports in L.A. where all these big container ships are coming in, they're empty, and some of those jobs are going to go away. And truck driving jobs are going to go away because, these goods are not coming into the United States. And Trump said, good. That's what we want, right? The United States is somehow saving money, which, he doesn't understand the basic economics of trade, but this relative and complete indifference to, people are going to lose their jobs. It's not just consumers who are not going to have access to these products anymore, but real people with real jobs, many of whom have supported Trump in the past, are going to lose their job. It's politically dumb, and it's logistically impossible to remake the economy in the way that he's suggesting right now.
Absolutely. And even if you were to make that argument, because there's an argument to be made about certain things that we could be manufacturing in America, I think it is fundamentally dangerous to, for instance, allow most of the drugs that we need in America to be consumed abroad. A lot of the high-tech things that we allow to be produced abroad, that they should be produced here. But we don't need a sweat stock industry or a doll-making industry in America. There are things that we can offshore in that regard. And, when you listen to them answer these questions, they talk out of both sides of their mouth. On the one hand, well, it's going to bring back jobs. Oh, and by the way, if it doesn't, we're going to have a lot of tariff money. Well, hint, if people are still buying things, that means they're paying the tariff. That means that those jobs are not coming back to America. So if we're generating a lot of money in terms of tariff, that means we're not accomplishing what you claim you're going to accomplish. But, this is what happens when you have somebody who has no intellectual curiosity is elected to office, and I don't want to sound like an elitist here, but when you have your guest on later on, if you could please raise the whole, Tom Nichols' work, the depth of expertise, and how America, has become this place where, hey, everybody can just do their own research. We can all just, figure it out ourselves, and we don't need the experts. Again, don't want to sound like I'm gatekeeping here, because we don't always get it right. But you know what? I didn't go to medical school. So you know what I do? I don't give medical advice to people.
Right.
I did study to earn a couple of degrees in political science, and within that field, I have a special a focus, and I give people advice there. And I'm not always right. But this notion that everybody can do everything in the age of the internet because you can Google search it, I mean, I'm sorry. That's just ridiculous. I can Google search flat Earth theory. That doesn't mean that the Earth is maybe flat.
No, this is such a good point, Stephen. And you can see this. Like, the individuals around Trump, the Scott Bessent, some of these individuals who actually do know what they're talking about, they look so uncomfortable because they know what they're saying is inaccurate. They know that we're living in a globalized economy that's based on this idea of comparative advantage, and everybody specializes in certain skill sets. And the reality is that we all benefit from that global marketplace. And, for 80 years, the United States has benefited economically from creating and spreading this system. And so, Bessent knows that this is terrible. He knows that there are going to be real costs to the United States. And, we're just now getting to the summer season, all of those goods coming in. But if he keeps this trade war up, we're soon going to be around the holiday season. And does he really want to continue to make the argument that your children don't need dolls, they don't need toys, and, oh, by the way, 5 pencils is going to be good? I mean, it's such a terrible economic argument, and so politically dumb as well.
Exactly. And beyond that, it's just sort of ridiculous. I mean, who in heaven's name has 1 pencil, let alone 5 today? I mean, it's 2025. So that's point number 1. And 2, in what sort of detached, non-billionaire world were Americans giving their children, 11-year-olds, $30? I mean, I have purchased dolls for my nieces and nephews. They're a Barbie. Now, I'm not talking about American Girl. That's where you really have to be well off. $20, $30, $40 a piece. So, I mean, do the math. Somebody's giving $1,000 worth of dolls to their child for Christmas. Who are these mythical people? You know, because they're not the average American. But this is where his mind is. It reminds me of George Bush Sr., who didn't know what a gallon of milk cost, and it really cost him politically. But this is Donald Trump. I mean, why are you surprised? And he is part of this movement on the Republican side that is openly anti-intellectual. There was always an undercurrent of anti-intellectualism on the right. Now it's abhorrent. They actually are vilifying people who bothered to go to school and learn these things, you know, because we tend to counter their narrative. But, of course, now we're the villains. We're the liberal villains.
Sure.
It's not the science that's bad. You know, we are the ones. You know, there's alternative facts and there's alternative science somewhere.
Well, and now it's not just rhetorical. Right? It's not just these conversations we're having. These policies, these beliefs, this attacking of the establishment is going to cost people their jobs. It's going to impact the U.S. economy. I mean, we're already seeing the impact on universities and research. Right? We are going to be less economically well off. We are going to be less healthy because some of these advancements that the universities have been leading are no longer going to be there. We're not going to be funding that type of work. So the cost that all of this is going to bear is we're going to feel it in the immediate, but it's also, we're talking about decades down the road as well, where the sort of ripple effect of these policies is just going to be devastating, largely because one man is angry and just wants to take out his anger on the country.
Exactly. If you were to have told me 10 years ago that somebody was actually talking about banning the use of fluoride in drinking water in an American state, I would say, okay, that's some fringe conspiracy theory that people are talking about somewhere in the dark web. You know, no, Montana has actually adopted it. And then there's a conversation about chemtrails. I mean, for God's sakes. I mean, again, a crazy conspiracy theory. It is now becoming mainstream because of this administration.
It is really something. And it's as if the country has to learn all of these lessons all over again. Like we have to go through the process. Oh, you're right. Fluoride actually does provide some benefits, because that's what will happen. You know, these states that are removing fluoride from the water, eventually they will realize the detriment to the dental health of their community, and they'll change that policy. But why do we have to continually reinvent the wheel? Oh, Steve, I'm up against the break, but thank you so much. Always fun to talk to another political scientist. So we are going to take a little bit of break right here, and then we will come back, and those phone lines are open. So if you want to give us a ring, it's 773-763-9278. Whatever is on your mind in terms of the political world. We'll be back in just a second.
WCPT Replay.
We're joined by Congressman Mike Quigley.
When I got sworn in 16 years ago, the first person that came up to me, of all things, was a Republican named Mark Kirk, who later became our senator. And he did give good advice. He said, the only thing that gets done here is when we meet in the middle. So there's a lot of truth to that. But, you know, what I tell folks who are looking from afar, not looking at what this president's doing, moving us toward more of an autocracy, is you meet in the middle when the middle is reasonable, right? And you both benefit. That's a two-party democracy at work. But when one side takes the most extreme positions, it's not my job to go way out there to meet them.
Yeah.
They have to come back to the norm.
Keep listening to WCPT 820, because facts matter.
I am an American veteran. I'm proud to have served this country. Helping veterans is something all Americans can participate in, and it's as simple as donating an old car that you have sitting around. When you call the Veteran Car Donation Program, they'll explain how their program works, and then arrange a time they can come and pick up your vehicle for free. Running or not, it doesn't matter. They take cars, trucks, motorcycles, or vans. Show your support by donating your car and get a tax deduction in the process. Call the Veteran Car Donation Program right now. They'll come and pick your car up for free, and you'll get a tax deduction in the process. Call the number we're about to give you right now. Thank you, and God bless America.
Call 800-610-3690. 800-610-3690. 800-610-3690. 800-610-3690.
WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to WCPT and Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. The phone lines are open. Phone and text lines are open, and call 773-763-9278. Before we get back to the phone line, just want to share a message from our friends at Team Hochberg. If you're looking to purchase a family member home after their death, you need to do what I do and call, or we do at WCPT, and call Team Hochberg, your trusted local lender. Pam wanted to purchase her grandmother's $400,000 home after she passed, which was left to Pam's father, Ted, and her Aunt Betty. Ted wanted to give his half of the equity to Pam and sell her the home for $200,000. Bad move. David would recommend Pam purchase the home for $400,000 and get a gift of equity from Ted for $200,000. This enabled Pam to secure a lower rate with no money out of her pocket. So let's review. David helped Pam purchase her grandmother's home without having to bring in a penny to closing and secure a lower rate. Team Hopgard helps all of us at WCPT and thousands of more listeners purchase homes after a family member's death, but they can't help you if you don't call 855-563-2843 or visit 563david.com. That number again, 855-563-2843 or visit 56david.com. Lower.com, equal housing lender, NMLS 1124061. So we had a couple text messages I want to get to. One, we had Natalie, who has been on the show as a city councilwoman. She said, love that we're discussing and summarizing the WCPT anniversary event. She was there chatting with Hal and Johnny Milton. I'm Natalie. I've been a WCPT listener for almost 15 years. I've been on with Eric Grant, with Richard Chu, Scott Duff, Michelle Peltier, and I've been in the studio as well as a call-in guest, attended many events. She said last Saturday was the balm we all needed, and that she's proud to be a local elected official out in Woodstock. Thank you so much, Natalie. Wonderful to hear your voice. We also got a message from Jay in Stokey, who said it's a statistical fact. Undocumented immigrants commit crimes at a lower rate than citizens. Trump is a felon convicted of more serious crimes than entering a country without papers. The cost of mass deportations this year is billions, 88 billion, and helps no one talk about waste. Absolutely. These are conversations that we should be having. There's moral conversations, but there's also sort of the logistical conversations of trying to do this and the cost that they all bring. So, all right, let's jump back to the phone lines. We've got Roosevelt in Chicago who wants to talk about the new Pope. Hey, Roosevelt, welcome to WCPT.
No, thank you for taking my call, Professor. First of all, before I talk about the new Pope, I'm going to give you my take as far as Trump. I come to the conclusion. First of all, I think you're trying to read too much into this guy, and let me tell you why.
Yeah.
The way I sum it up is like this. He's a combination of three characters. Himself, the narcissist, Roy Cohn, remember who he was?
Yeah.
And last but not least, the character Frank, I can't remember his last name, Leonardo DiCaprio played on Catch Me If You Can.
Sure.
So that's my assessment. So you're trying to figure out and reasoning why he does this, why he does that. I think if you combine all those three characters, people, any way you look at it, you come up with what I came up with. And if you notice, at times he's a narcissist. At times he's like Frank, the character from Catch Me If You Can. And at other times he doesn't admit that he did wrong, and that's Roy Cohn. So I believe that that's what he is. So I say this to my family, some people in my family. They're trying to think the reasonable way, with reason, with logic. You can't. That's point number one. When it comes down to the Pope, I think the Vatican sent a message to the world because there's too many coincidences, in my opinion. The latest thing I found out about the new Pope is that he has roots in Haiti. His grandfather on his mother's side came from Haiti through Louisiana, New Orleans. So combine that, Haiti, Peru, Chicago. Okay, what does that tell me? It tells me that the Vatican is moving into the new world, and I agree with you. He is we don't know it yet, but he's going to follow in the footsteps of Francis, the last pope, in my opinion, because there's too many similarities between both popes. They're both from South America and have roots in South America. Yep. Remember, Francis was from Argentina. So here's the thing too. His first language, if you consider his roots, is Spanish. That also coincides with Francis, and he lived in Chicago, so he knows our way of living here in Chicago as citizens or as residents, or just a day in, day out living. And he also knows about South America and the struggles that the common people have in all those poor countries, Central America, South America. And let me tell you, those people down south, they know about us. We don't know about them, meaning Central America, South America. We are very lack of knowledge is when it comes down to all these countries. And let's not forget, last but not least, Reagan had a lot to do with what's going on in Central America back in the 80s.
There's a long legacy there. Well, actually, Roosevelt, a couple of thoughts I'll share with you, and maybe I can give you some feedback on this. To start with your thoughts on Trump, and you bring up Roy Cohn, and I think far too many people forget that Roy Cohn, who was he was the attorney for McCarthy during the Red Scare, right? So he has this long history of dealing with populist demagogues, and then he ultimately transitioned to be the lawyer for Donald Trump in the formative years of Donald Trump's career, right, where he begins to think about this is how you deal with people. And you're right, there's an element of narcissism to him, but he really, I think it's hard. The parallels between McCarthy and the Red Scare and Donald Trump and sort of this populist demagoguery are really, really, really compelling. And I think you understand a lot by seeing the through line to both of those. And I also think your message about the Vatican is really, really interesting. The politics inside the Vatican are far too obscure for us to really know, but it does feel like there may be a message, right? There was always talk that the Vatican would never pick an American pope just because of America's cultural hegemony, right? America dominates the world in so many ways, economically, politically, but also culturally, that you wouldn't also want to have an American pope. But Pope Leo seems like a different type of American. As you talked about, he is truly international, has spent time in Peru and Latin America, is humble, and they talk about him as being a sort of a quiet man. That's a very, very different American than the Donald Trump America. And I'm really curious to see the relationship that we see develop between this Pope and the United States. Is he more vocal in speaking out against immigration? Does he share those thoughts? I think it's probably likely, given that he already has done so. But you're right. This sets up a really, really fascinating contrast.
Yeah, and Professor, also to add to it, let's not forget that Europe knows a lot about other countries within Europe, so they're very knowledgeable when it comes down to American history, Americans in general, and we're not like that. We don't study history anymore. We don't study. And look, on the contrary, look what they're trying to do in Oklahoma. They're trying to erase the Gulf of Mexico. Look what Congress is doing as recent as yesterday. They voted to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico. And look what's going on in Florida and Texas. Florida, when they want to bring up a law so that children that are 14 years old start working on the fields. So all this, I'm sure that the Vatican and in general Europe, they all know. They're up to date. We don't think that they are. They are very knowledgeable when it comes down to our history and current events, especially now with the computers, with the internet and everything. So I think, back to the Vatican, I think it's a way of putting a stop to Trump, at least slow him down. Sure. Because especially if the Pope does what you just said, especially if he's vocal, especially if he pushes back on the injustice and anti-human treatment of these people that he's sending to El Salvador, and now he wants to send them to Libya. So that's it, Professor.
Well, thank you so much. Another point that you made that I think is really, really important is that oftentimes most of the world knows more about the United States than we know about the world. And I think that you were talking about Latin America and Central America. I think it also applies to Asia. One of the things, I study international politics, so I talk to people from all around the world. And one of the things is we think about a world where China is rising and becoming also a major global player, that China and Asia in general knows much more about America. They know who we are, but we don't know much about them. And that's a danger, right? You want to be able to understand the world that you are operating in. And so I think it is problematic that we don't pay as much attention as we should to those around the world. And I think that's a good step. So all right, we are up against the break. We're going to take a break. We have some phone lines open. So 773-763-9278 if you want to chat about some politics on a Friday. We'll be right back on WCPT.
When it comes to banking, you need a bank you can trust. A bank with a rock-solid reputation and the highest integrity. A bank that gives you the attention and respect you deserve.
ABOC first opened its doors in downtown Chicago in 1922, and we've made our name on deep expertise, best-in-class service, and a strong commitment to our customers. We know the Chicago business market inside and out and can help you craft the perfect banking solution, no matter what type of business you're in.
And if you're looking for a banking partner for your labor union, we can bring the type of expertise that only comes from a bank that was founded by labor unions and still has union employees and shareholders to this day.
Whether you need a deposit account, loan, trust services, or investment management, ABOC has you covered. Let's work together to manage your finances today while planning for a better tomorrow. ABOC, a bank built on a strong foundation.
Visit aboc.com to learn more. Member FDIC.
Give your liver the support it needs with Active Liver. Go to newnordicusa.com, Amazon, or ask for Active Liver at your local CVS. New you, new Nordic.
AP News. I'm Ed Donahue. It was a sluggish end to the day on Wall Street over uncertainty about trade talks this weekend between the U.S. and China. President Trump has floated the idea of reducing tariffs from 145% to 80%. John Gong with the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing says China sees this as a U.S.-created problem.
It's up to Washington to first take actions to at least partially, address this problem. So I think if Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent doesn't go into this negotiation with this kind of a mindset, it's going to be very difficult.
Bessent has confidently compared Beijing to a card player stuck with a losing hand. A federal prosecutor says the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, Ras Baraka, has been arrested at an ICE detention center where he was protesting its opening. The U.S. attorney says he was trespassing and ignored warnings from Homeland Security. A federal judge in Vermont released a Turkish Tufts University student detained in a Louisiana immigration center for more than 6 weeks after she was arrested while walking along a street near Boston. Ramesa Ozkirk has criticized Tufts' response to the fighting in Gaza. Jesse Rossman is with the ACLU.
One of the dangers of what we are seeing in the government's behavior in this case is the very strong message it sends to people who are watching that you can be punished by your speech. And what we heard from the court today was confirmation that that is not what we do in this country.
Retired Supreme Court Justice David Souter has died. The AP's Mark Sherman is at the Supreme Court.
The opinion he's probably best known for is one from 1992, and it was the court's decision that reaffirmed the right to an abortion.
Souter was a New Hampshire Republican who became a favorite of liberals during his nearly 20 years on the bench. The air traffic controllers directing planes into the Newark International Airport lost their radar for a second time in 2 weeks. This is AP News. There are new poll numbers on the Trump administration's relationship with colleges and universities.
56% of U.S. adults who responded to a poll by the Associated Press and the North Center for Public Affairs Research disapprove of President Donald Trump's threats to cut federal funding to colleges and universities unless they comply with his political agenda. About 40% of respondents approve with what Trump is doing, which is in line with his overall job approval. Trump calls universities hotbeds of liberalism and anti-Semitism. Schools such as Harvard University, where the Trump administration has frozen more than $2.2 billion in federal grants and has threatened to strip the school of its tax-exempt status. About 60% of people who answered the poll say colleges and universities make more of a positive contribution link to medical and science research than a negative one. Donna Warder, Washington.
And I'm Ed Donahue, AP News.
This is 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and streaming worldwide at WCPT820.com. We are Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter. Now, your WCPT 820 weather update.
From the Weatherology Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Jennifer Wojcicki. We'll see sunny skies here this afternoon with a high into the mid-60s. Winds out of the northeast around 5 to 10 miles per hour. And for tonight, mostly clear with a low around 47. By Saturday, sunshine, a high of 74 degrees. Sunday, plenty of blue skies and sun, a high of 74. Monday, mostly sunny, high of 81. That's your latest Chicago weather update. Currently, it's 64.
Remember when you get to work to hop over to WCPT820.com or the TuneIn Radio app and stream The Stephanie Miller Show. Weekdays 8 to 11 a.m. on Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter. This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to WCPT. We've got the phone lines open, the Credo mobile phone line. And that reminder, that mobile and text line is 773-763-9278. Keep the texts coming if you like. Credo Mobile, a progressive phone company that is better for all people and the planet. I also want to remind everybody that on Saturday on The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath, his guest will be Abraham Newman, director of the BMW Center for German and European Studies at Georgetown. Sounds really interesting. Jeff Mandel, co-founder of Law Forward. James Grossman, the executive director at the American Historical Association. Jennifer Berkshire, the adjunct faculty member at the Economic Policy Institute and creator and co-host of the Education Policy Podcast, Have You Heard? That's The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath, Saturdays from 1 to 4 p.m. Central on WCPT, Chicago's progressive talk for 20 years. All right, let's get back to those phone lines. We've got Paul from Seattle who wants to talk about Trump and dolls. Hey, Paul, it's good to chat with you again. Always enjoy when you come and talk on WCPT.
Hello, Professor Wood. Yeah, I think you're right. The Democrats have a golden slogan with the Trump wants to take your children's dolls away.
The key word being golden, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, that's Republican-made. That is a Republican-made sloganeering. And I would go for, I don't expect Democrats to pick up on this kind of clever wordplay because they don't have always the best sense of humor. But I would say, parents, they want to take, Donald Trump says that your children can have $2 instead of 30, and mom and dad, that probably means that he expects that instead of $30, you can have $2, and they won't go with 5.
Yes.
What he's really saying, and I'm surprised that nobody's picked up on it, is that's a 93% reduction in the lifestyle you've been accustomed to.
Yes.
In fact, it gets worse. When he says that your kids can have 5 pencils instead of 250, that's a 98% reduction in the lifestyle that your child has become accustomed to. This is just hit him over the head with this because there's no denying it. It's such senseless. It's thoughtlessness that he says stupid things like that and is not held to account for them.
Absolutely, right. And again, two things that you're hitting on here. One is it's just terrible political strategy. And you're right. The Democrats have to get better. They have to deploy some of the tactics that we see Republicans use so well, which is stay on message and hit with the simple message, right? Every Democrat should be talking about Trump taking your dolls away and talking about the numbers that you suggested, right? A major cut, 98%, whatever you said, cut in your income, that your lifestyle is changing because of the idiosyncratic and irrational policies of a man who doesn't understand global trading more. That message day after day, everybody should be hitting on that, and it would work because these policies are so dangerous.
Yeah, and the other thing that they need. I'm going to call my representative later this afternoon and say, look, the reason that Donald Trump is being permitted to impose these tariffs when the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, the very first sentence says, Congress shall have the power to lay taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. Those exact words. So if if he's laying tariffs of these duties, imposts, and excises, what's to say he can't lay taxes, domestic taxes? I mean, where does it stop? In other words, what this is, as Congress, the Republican Congress, the MAGA Republican Congress, has abrogated its powers, which is, I think the court has ruled they can't do that. You are being taxed without representation. That is the fundamental reason we started this country.
Yes.
Taxation without representation.
This is such
this is that every day.
Absolutely. That's another message that would win, right? It's a simple message that would hit home, and it also would work targeting a lot of these members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, because then they would have to go back to their constituents and explain why they gave away the constitutional power to tax and spend, right? That this is a power that the Constitution, the founding fathers said, this is something we want Congress to have. We don't want the executive branch to have. And Congress has given Trump that power. Tomorrow, if they wanted to, they could end all of this. Republicans in Congress could end all of this and say, enough with the tariffs. You know, every tariff that you want to impose, you have to come to Congress first and get approval. And they have the constitutionally defined power to do so. They don't have the political will to do so, right? And so I think absolutely you think about that messaging and you hit them in their home districts. I mean, again, this is setting up really well for the Democrats if they have the ability to take that messaging and really run with it.
Well, I think it's as simple as Donald Trump wants to take your children's dolls away. You don't have to be, a real bonky constitutional expert and scholar to understand. Every sixth grader knows taxation without representation.
Yeah.
It's on your sixth grade civics test. I still at least go that far. Is that why did we start? Why was America started? Well, they were taxing the colonies without representation. Everybody knows that much. And so you don't really have to dig very deep and get people to understand wonky things, although there's plenty of wonky things to talk about.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. Here's the thing that Congress cannot abrogate their powers. And if you look at the Trump theory, which is they want to dismantle the administrative state, the administrative agencies. And, okay, that's not necessarily in and of itself a quacky idea. Back in the 1840s, I mean, one of the great Associate Supreme Court Justices, Joseph Story, thought that, no, Congress cannot delegate its powers to administrative agencies. Well, that's not the way things have turned out.
Right.
But if you're going to do this, if you're going to say that Congress cannot delegate its powers in administrative agencies, then you surely cannot say that Congress can abrogate its powers to the executive.
Yes. No, 100%, right? But it falls to the Democrats to frame that message, right? They need to get out there and do that and frame it in that way. And then, again, talk about the constitutional questions, because this is working its way through the court systems. We're beginning to hear courts come in and say, like, yeah, the executive branch can't do that. You can't just defund the Department of Treasury and Education, and you can't just kill USAID. That's not something the executive branch can do, but you need Democrats out there sort of articulating that message. As you were talking, I was thinking back when Biden passed his big climate legislation, right? And one of the things we saw out of Marjorie Taylor Greene, and while I disagree with everything she does, her tactics can sometimes be effective. She talked about that this legislation is going to force Americans to no longer be able to eat meat, right? That we're taking hamburgers away from Americans. It's totally inaccurate, but it was politically effective. I mean, she even called Joe Biden the Hamburglar, which is, I mean, again, that's good. That's effective politics. And I think Democrats need to deploy that kind of messaging now to say, hey, Trump is handing this, as you said, a golden gift of the dolls and all of these other issues. You need to start framing this messaging for the public as a whole, not just Democrats, independents, Republicans, the whole country, to say this is what's happening. I love your point about bringing it all the way back to the origins of the country and no taxation without representation. All of that works.
Well, as educators, we understand maybe better than politicians do how to present things to students, people, in ways that are easy for them to understand, and not in the wonkiest ways. You have to, as educators, we have to present things to students in ways that they can understand, and analogies that they can internalize easily, so that they can begin to wrap their own minds around the text that they're going to read and so on, so they have some pre-understanding of what they're going on. But, you look at this issue of immigration, and it's like, and I was reading in an article on human rights, and the idea that everyone has the right to seek a safe place to live. So the double standard that's being applied to people, particularly immigrants from South America who are seeking asylum, isn't that exactly the same thing that the Pilgrims, the colonists, came to do to escape persecution and seek a safe place to live? That's exactly what they did.
Absolutely, right. And that lends itself also to a religious message as well, right? Thinking about, like, what does it mean to be an ethical person? How should we live our lives? You know, what does the Christian church, I mean, there are so many different ways that you could message that to hit people in a meaningful way, to frame an issue where they say, you know what, this isn't okay. I don't support this. I want to move another direction on immigration, on tariffs, all of these things. You know, Trump is very, very aggressive, but to be honest, he's not particularly effective at this messaging, and it's creating space for the Democrats. But to your earlier point, they can't be too wonky, right? They've got to keep the message simple. And if you do that, there is a lot of potential for going after Trump and stopping a lot of what's happening.
Yeah, let me just finish up with one thought here.
Sure.
I think what I see happening is Democrats, people get angry with Democrats, and you hear this from people who voted for Trump. They're angry with. There was a MAGA person who really bit my head off about a Facebook post. He said that Democrats were stupid enough to let Trump win, and I was like, well, "Wait a minute, who are you angry with here?" I mean,
right.
it's like, I think what happens is people get angry with Democrats for allowing things. And I think this is what happened to the working class. That they are angry with Democrats because Democrats have not. They say have not protected their status, their interest as working people. And yet they go ahead and vote for exactly the enemy of theirs that will do them the worst. And it doesn't make sense, but it's almost like they hold the Democrats responsible for not. It's like being their parents and not taking care of them. You let all this happen, you know. And so now I'm angry with you. I'm going to send a message. Remember, Barack Obama said, you know, but the message, for one thing, a protest by not voting, and Barack Obama said, that's not a protest. You disappeared. I presume you sent me the Congress you want me to work with. So not voting does not send a message. You disappear. You're nobody.
Absolutely, right. Sometimes Democrats can be their own worst enemy on stuff like that. So, well, thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate your insight, and it's always fun to talk with you.
Take care. Thanks so much.
You bet. Well, we've got one quick text message I'm going to get to, and then we'll get to a break. Somebody says, you know, they asked the question, does the general public realize that funds rescinded by DOJ will not be distributed for public services? And I think a lot of people don't really realize that, right? Then this gets to the question that Paul was raising, right? So if Congress allocates funds and says we want to spend it this way, and it is, you know, signed by the president, it's approved, this legal question of whether they need to spend that funds. And I think the general constitutional perspective is yes, they need to do that. And the president can't halt those funds. Now, we will see. It's working its way through the court system now. We're seeing some of the early rulings saying, like, yes, the president doesn't have the power to stop funds that have already been allocated. But again, this is all going to take more time before we get to the final answer. All right, we got to get to a break right now. We'll be soon back on WCPT.
Driving it home with Patty Vasquez.
Really, we need to start accepting that the vision that these people have, you know, the Heritage Foundation, Musk, Alito, and Clarence Thomas, they are prepping us for a dictatorship. We need to destroy the democracy from the inside, making it dysfunctional and not functioning at all, so that they can take it over with their form of dictatorship and make this a corporate entity.
Patty Vasquez, weeknights 5 to 7 on WCPT 820.
Resetting your password, unsubscribing from emails, printing anything. Why are simple things sometimes so complicated? Thankfully, with an auto owner's insurance independent agent, getting the right coverage for your business doesn't have to be one of them, so you can get back to more important things, like learning how that printer works. That's simple human sense.
In Will and DuPage County, contact Paul Fazio at Fazio Insurance, 815-727-2611 or FazioInsurance.com.
You're listening to WCPT 820 because facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster William Muck.
Welcome back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. We are taking calls and talking about all of the political things. I just want to remind you that on Monday on Choose Views, Richard will be talking to Choose Views regular Sarah Jones of Politicus USA and Rich Logis of Leaving MAGA. Choose Views weekdays from 6 to 8 a.m., 8 a.m. Central on WCPT 820, the Heartland Signal website. Tune in, YouTube, and Facebook. Everywhere it is. All right, let's get to Victor Salem, who's in Oregon, who wants to talk about tariffs and Trump. Welcome to WCPT.
Hey, you guys are doing such a great job. You know, all the hosts on WCPT should start their own network. And the reason is, as long as mainstream news, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News are owned by corporate billionaires, the Democratic message will never get out. And to prove that point, the disgraceful speech by Krusty Gnome on Homeland Security about one Hispanic who was an undocumented immigrant who murdered someone, whereas the real issue is the 50 people a day that are killed by gun violence. Do you think the Republican Party is going to do anything about gun violence? Hell no.
Right.
They're all sold out to the gun manufacturers and the NRA. This is the Republican Party messaging. They want you to believe that undocumented immigrants are the problem, whereas the big problem is here with Americans killing each other at the rate of 50 people a day. And as far as tariffs go, that's going to bankrupt the United States. That's going to cause a major domino effect in our economy. For instance, you take a piece of lumber from Canada that's now going to cost, instead of $2, it'll be costing $3 for a 2x4. Yeah. All that lumber is being shipped around the country by truckers who deliver it to retailers and wholesalers. And then that lumber, again, the price goes up, and people who use lumber to build houses are going to have to pay 25% more for their lumber, which increases the price of a home from $500,000 to $750,000. And then people won't be able to afford a house like most people can't now anyway. But it's going to be even more impossible. And that means the trucking industry won't be able to pick up that lumber from Canada and distribute it to wholesalers and retailers. And it's a vicious circle. That's true with everything that these tariffs are going to affect the economy.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's not just one person that's going to be hurt. It's a dozen people along the, what am I trying to say? All the people that are affected that use products from overseas. We have a $6 trillion that people buy every year from foreign countries, and Trump wants to put a 25% tariff on all these products and services, and that is going to all the money that we spend in purchasing products overseas is used by dozens of people to build other products, and even to sell at a profit. And a lot of those products are used by small businesses in manufacturing different other products that are sold in the United States. All these small businesses won't be able to afford and the product at a 25% tariff or whatever.
Sure.
And in order for them to sell something, it will cost the consumer 50% more because they have to make a profit.
Right.
And so it's a vicious circle. And tariffs never work. And he's deliberately trying to destroy the economy. I don't see any other reason or purpose for using a tariff.
It's so outdated.
Does that make any sense?
No, it doesn't, right? And I spent a lot of my time on campuses talking to the economists, right? I want to find an economist and pick their brain about tariffs. And I haven't found an economist who thinks that, the broad-based tariff strategy of the Trump administration is successful, right? And to the point that you were making, we live in a complex global economic system, a system that is interdependent, where products are made all over the world, and oftentimes a single product will stop in multiple different things. Like, it's not just our shirt is made in one country. It is possible that those products move in multiple different countries. I mean, think about cars and what we've learned about the automotive industry, right? The United States and Canada and Mexico, these are seamless markets where you can't simply put up walls and say, well, we're not going to make this anymore, right? And this is a system that emerged out of World War II. There was a reason we have this system. It's because the United States said, we're tired of world wars. We want to create a globally interdependent system that decreases the incentive for wars and builds off sort of these traditional ideas about trade that we know. And is it a perfect system? No. It still perpetuates lots of inequality, but the idea of throwing that system away and just putting arbitrary tariffs up is so silly and naive. And to your point, it's not thoughtful at all. There are meaningful ways to think about reforming that system so you can address real issues of equity and think about inequality around the world and in the United States. Those are all real conversations. Donald Trump's conversation about I'm going to put 145% tariffs on China and then lower them to 80% because that's going to solve the problem, that's not thoughtful, right? That's not appreciating all of the complexities that are playing out in the current global economy.
Exactly. And, to make your point, Trump dropped it to 80% from 145%. But in between, he made a trade agreement with the United Kingdom to lower tariffs to 10%. So I think that's the objective for Donald Trump, because he knows, and all the economists know, that this tariff war is going to destroy the United States economy.
Yeah.
And so he lowered the price to 80%, and then when they do have a meeting this Saturday or whenever, they're going to lower it to 10%. They're going to agree on hopefully a 10% tariff. But even then, 10% is, we do over a $1.5 trillion trade with China. And, the money he makes from these tariffs are not going to go to the people, because he cut all the services and the programs to the American people.
There will be real costs to that. Yes, absolutely. I want to,
you know where the money's going to go. It's going to go to contractors and his buddies and friends like Elon Musk.
Right.
That's where this money's going.
The oligarchy benefits. I do want to come back to a point that you made earlier that I think is really, really useful. You were talking about, what is the real problem? And you noted that, Trump is framing this as it's an immigration problem, and, it's a tariff problem. But as we focus all of our time and attention on those issues, it is really distracting us from the other real problems that we face in this country in terms of economic inequality. And we could talk about reproductive rights, and we could talk about climate change. There are a whole host of real problems that we as a country need to think about and need to address. But Donald Trump makes that impossible because he pulls us in a different direction. Victor, I really appreciate your call. I got to get another caller in. Thank you so much, and have a nice day. All right, we're going to move to Ed in Palos Park. Hey, Ed, welcome to WCPT.
Hello, Professor. Glad to hear that you're doing well.
Yes, thank you.
Terrifying incident today. The mayor of Newark, New Jersey, was taken into custody by the Gestapo, known as ICE, and he was put in their detention facility there. They said he was trespassing and that he had been warned previous times, and that was their job to take him into custody. So things are getting bad. I mean, when they can just pluck, somebody of that notoriety and just disrespect them and put them in a detention center, when is this going to end?
I hadn't heard that. That is troubling, and it fits with the example from a couple of weeks ago when they detained the judge up in Wisconsin, right? And the idea is the performative element again, right? They want people to see this. They want people to feel intimidated. They want judges. They want public officials to be on edge, right? Because that's part of the point. And again, we have seen this throughout history. When you see these kind of tactics, usually they are deployed by authoritarian dictatorial regimes who are trying to use fear to pursue their policy. So this really strikes me as a very, very troubling development.
Further news will come out on it. It just happened, I believe. Also, the Republicans are getting together because they want to rename Earth, the planet Earth. They want to rename it to the planet Trump. And it goes along with everything they're doing. I mean, to have a session there in the House to discuss that bill about the Gulf of America, that is absolutely ludicrous. I mean, all these things, all these issues going on where they could be discussing how to help people and whatever, and they're tearing things down, and here's where we're at. That is. I hope that's not the case. That they're not really considering that. But it wouldn't surprise me if they were. And I think it speaks to this broader dynamic of the way in which our politics has become so stupid. I've talked about that in the past, right? The stupidification of American politics, and Trump. Part of that is distraction. Part of it is he's trying to own the libs. But there are real costs to that. And I appreciate your voice. That was a really interesting comment. You got me thinking about stuff. We've got to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to be talking with Kleinman, who is the Director of Research at the States Project, and we're going to be thinking about what's going on at state legislatures. We'll be right back on WCPT.
Chicago, come with me as we spend the next 4 years screaming, "What now?" It's the Matt McNeil Show on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Weeknights at 9 p.m. It'll be a hoot watching the MAGA Republicans slowly come to the realization they voted for their own pain and suffering. It won't make our pain better, but at least we can bask in the glow of their eternal 40-watt bulbs as they slowly turn up the dimmer switch in their own noggins. We'll scream, "We told you so," and they'll scream, "Eggs!" Weeknights at 9 p.m. It's the Matt McNeil Show right here on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
How did Babbel become the award-winning language learning app? We thought of you. All of you. Take Sierra. As a visual learner, she uses Babbel's wordplay videos.
Today I'll share a quick lesson on shopping in French.
Merci beaucoup. Malcolm is a listening learner. So he checks with Babbel's speech recognition to be
Precio.
However you learn, Babbel makes it easy. Save up to 50% on your Babbel subscription at Babbel.com. That's BABBEL.com.
Is your upper floor too hot in the summer? Are energy bills climbing with every degree? Green Attic can help. With over 15 years of experience and more than 1,000 five-star reviews, Green Attic is a trusted Chicagoland name for insulation, ventilation, and roofing solutions that improve comfort, energy efficiency, and indoor air quality. They specialize in attic insulation, spray foam, crawl space encapsulation, mold remediation, and solar attic fan installation, all designed to keep your home cooler in the warmer months. Green Attic also offers full-service roofing through Green Attic Roofing, including traditional and solar roofing systems with instant online quotes and long-lasting, eco-friendly materials. Green Attic backs its work with the industry's only 10-year labor warranty, plus lifetime warranties on selected materials. Schedule a free insulation consultation at greenattic.com or get an instant roofing quote at greenatticroofing.com. That's greenattic.com and greenatticroofing.com.
You're listening to WCPT 820. Here's the latest Chicago weather update.
I'm meteorologist Ray Miller from the Weatherology Weather Center. Clear skies tonight with a low temperature of 47 degrees. On Saturday, we'll see sunshine with a high of 68 and northwest winds at 15 to 30 miles an hour. Sunday, sunshine with a high temperature around 64 and northeast winds at 5 to 10. Monday, sunny with a high of 67. Tuesday, scattered showers and storms with a high of 68. And for Wednesday, a couple of isolated storms with a high of 71 degrees. That's the latest Chicago weather update. Right now, it's 63.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck. Because that's how we roll.
Welcome back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. We are joined this segment by Aaron Kleinman, who is the Director of Research at the States Project. This is an organization focused narrowly on state legislatures and specifically to getting Democrats elected at the state level. Welcome, Aaron. It's really great to talk with you.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on, Professor.
Absolutely. So, all right, so many things I want to pick your brain about. I want to start with the basics. I'm not sure that people fully understand that for decades, going all the way back to Nixon, the Republican Party has strategically targeted state legislatures, and those efforts have been very, very effective. Can you tell us a little bit about your organization and your efforts to level the playing field against Republicans at the state level?
Yeah, so as you noted, in 1970, during the Nixon administration, Lewis Powell, future Supreme Court Justice, wrote a memo where he said, hey, this is how we undo the post-war / New Deal, order. One is by funding our own institutions, like, you think about like the Cato Institute, you think about all the Koch AFP things, that's that. Two, you kind of fund right-wing media. That's where you get Fox News, where you get right-wing talk radio, all that. And the number three, and then also that was actually part of number. And then, also they want to take over courts. So that's how you have the Federalist Society. And then they also want to take over state legislatures. And that's what they did there. It was part of a decades-long plan that really culminated in 2010 when a lot of people woke up the morning after that midterm election and was like,
yeah,
my congressional seat is going to be gerrymandered because this is, they've been playing on this for decades. And then when Trump was elected in 2016, people were like, oh, wow, this guy's president. And also, oh, my God, in a state like New York, for example, Republicans control the state Senate. How do we let that happen?
Yeah.
And so, our founder was a New York State senator who's like, hey, we have a big hole we got to dig ourselves out of. And since then, we have been working to flip, so we've been working to flip legislatures to have a, more people-forward agenda. So you have that in states like, in Maine, for example, you see a Republican House, or Republican Senate, we helped flip that. We helped win trifectas in Michigan and Minnesota. In a bad midterm year in 2022. We've helped flip the Pennsylvania House and actually stayed blue even as Trump was carrying the state in 2024. So we are really just trying to level the playing field, give state lawmakers who want to, devote themselves to things like equal opportunity for all, personal freedoms, fair markets. So, people who stand for those types of principles, we want to help them get elected.
Yeah, I think people are aware of this long-standing effort at the Supreme Court, right? Because that gets talked about a lot, but not the same when it comes to state legislatures. The other thing a really important point that you highlight on your webpage is that the current stage of politics, many of the nation's most sort of important battles, whether we're talking about abortion, gun control, voting rights, they're not really playing out at the federal level. They're unfolding in the state capitals. But most of our attention still remains at the national level. Tell us a little bit more of, what's going on at the state level, why this is so important for so many of these big issues.
Yeah, well, I'll give you a good example of something that's in the news. Vaccination, for example. You have RFK Jr. running Health and Human Services, doing all of these awful things about, messing with vaccines and things like that. But ultimately, it's still up to states as to what the vaccination requirements are for going to schools. And so that's why you have this measles outbreak really started in Texas, where they've been, again, you've had a right-wing legislature for decades, and they've been really working to loosen vaccination requirements, and that's when you have a measles outbreak. Meanwhile, you've seen in almost every state so far this year, you've seen bills introduced that would loosen vaccination requirements for children. If you have, if the right wing controls your state, those bills have a good chance of passing. If they don't, then they can be blocked.
Yeah.
And so if you're thinking about just, the safety of newborns, that is a state issue.
Yeah.
Well, make sure your kid doesn't have it matters who runs your state if you don't want your newborn kid to get measles. It's unfortunate, but that's fact.
Yeah. One of the things that it sounds like you really focus on, your research focus on, is tracking all of these bills being introduced by Republicans at the state level. And I got to see a little of what you're up to. And it's an exhaustive database. You really are doing yeoman's work there. And you write that much of this legislation is wildly out of step with what Americans want. So tell us this database that you're producing when you're looking at these state level legislatures. What are you finding?
I mean, it's things that you wouldn't even like. It was really conspiracy fringe stuff. Even like a few years ago, is now fully within the right wing, mainstream. Vaccination is a great example. Nobody was proposing anti-vaccination bills until a few years ago, and now they're going nationwide. Same with anti-fluoridation bills. Anti-fluoridation campaigns, were a joke when Dr. Strangelove came out in 1960. Yeah. And now in Utah, it was one of the first states to actually pass a law that no longer required municipalities to put fluoride in their water. I think Florida passed another one. This was something where a few years ago, I think only one state really had a bill like this proposed. But again, you kind of have this RFK Jr. alliance with Republicans, and all of a sudden they're proposing anti-fluoridation bills everywhere, and they're starting to pass. And all that's going to do is basically make it so that the poorest, the people who can't afford the best dental care are going to have worse teeth. I mean, that's the upshot of all of this. And so, yeah, I mean, you also see things like anti-chemtrails bills. I mean, at the federal level, the FAA seems to be falling apart, but, what happens when the first state bans, basically airplanes from releasing condensation into the air? I mean, you're talking about a group of people that functionally want to repeal the 20th century.
What is when these bills are being introduced, what's the democratic process like? I mean, are they having open conversations? Is the public weighing in? Because one of the things that you highlight is that this legislation is wildly unpopular. So what is the process like? Are they doing it in the cover of night, or are these conversations happening out in the open?
I mean, they're happening. I mean, it's unfortunate. I mean, part of this is, again, because if you think about the Powell memo and, kind of right-wing control of media. I mean, it's not just right-wing control of media, though. It's also, local media disappearing. And you have, a state like Missouri, for example, where a lot of these bills are getting introduced. Jefferson City, a bit out of the way. You don't have really a robust journalism core there that you would have had just a decade ago. And so it's just a lot easier for these things to escape people's attention. And so there's more room for right-wing state lawmakers to really become incredibly extreme without any consequences. And then, again, you also talk about, national polarization and things like that. And, in a lot of states, you have gerrymandering that, like in North Carolina, for example, that really helps keep Republicans in power. And you have something where there's less accountability than there used to be. And there's less, and again, it's a race to the right in the primary in all these deep red seats. And so there's just no, there no longer exists kind of a penalty for this conspiratorial thinking. Ideally, that can come back somehow, but I mean, I don't know how you do that quite yet.
Yeah.
And so the way that you kind of check these excesses is ultimately by trying to, in the more marginal, I think in these deep red seats, I think it's just, I don't know how you get kind of conspiratorial Republicans out of power. So really, it's just in more marginal seats, you ultimately have to kind of defeat them, or at least elect Republicans who will stand up to them.
Sure.
And so, yeah.
It's really about putting a ground game together. I mean, I'm originally from Wisconsin, and I can't think of a better example of some of what you're describing, where the public is relatively evenly divided in Wisconsin. It's one of those 50-50 truly purple states. Yet for years, the Republicans dominated the state legislature, and up until recently, the state Supreme Court, and consequently pursued legislation that did not represent the political will of the state at all, right? I mean, I think Wisconsin's a really interesting state where you've seen some movement there, right? And your group, your organization has been very effective in helping shape some of those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's actually Wisconsin. I mean, it's, you come out of 2024 and it's hard to think of, success stories, but we flipped, because you got UMass there, we flipped all of the marginal state Senate seats there. The state Senate is poised to, if there's a good 2026, we can flip the state Senate. The tipping point seat in the state assembly, it was only like a couple thousand votes, I think. Just a few percentage points. We were very, very close. I mean, we gained a number of seats, and I think in 2026, in a decent midterm, it doesn't have to be a great midterm even in Wisconsin, you could see a Democratic trifecta in that state for the first time in a while. And, you think about what you could do. I mean, one of the first things you could do is repeal Act 10 there, which I know your listeners definitely would love, and, kind of return that state to its good governance tradition. But the only way you get there is by investing in state legislatures.
Well, and you're right. It's a staged process, right? Because you have to start winning some elections. And in Wisconsin, we saw, the Supreme Court shifting in a liberal direction meant that you could really finally address some of these questions of gerrymandering. And you could think about broader voting rules, right? Yeah. And that allows the state to really, or the demos to really express itself. And that's when you start to see real good governance, right? But it is staged. It's almost like baby steps to get to that point. One of the things that really struck me as I was looking through your webpage, you talk about, lots of legislation to ban books, despite the fact that 84% of the population opposes such legislation. Limiting voters' access to vote on key issues. 79% of the public opposes that. Banning access to reproductive rights. 67% oppose this. And that disconnect is really stunning when we see this legislation being enacted and being done, but the public, for the most part, is not at all supportive. I mean, the book banning one, 84%. That's to me, that was stunning.
Yeah. I mean, again, that was pretty shocking too. And there has been a proliferation of legislation across the country that would just make it a lot easier for people to ban books. It's like, how do they get away with this? I mean, and part of it too is ultimately educating the public about the importance of state legislatures and actually what they're doing. Mm-hmm. I think there are a lot of people, you probably know them, they're like lifelong Republicans, but it's not something that's, necessarily they think about that deeply. It's just something that they've always done, and they maybe think that the party represents something that they no longer do. And how do you reach those people? It's hard. And it's, ultimately when you invest in state legislative campaigns and candidates who, by the way, in a state like Wisconsin, you can actually have a candidate personally talk to a lot of the people in that district and try to win them over. And so, it's kind of like it's that hard, grinding work of just like winning people over block by block that, ultimately state lawmakers can really try to do. And so, again, with a decimated local media, these things can escape attention of people, and it's on the campaigns to get people to care about it, and it's on, people like the fine folks at WCPT to broadcast people like, hey, you got to care about this, folks.
Well, that was my last question for you was, okay, what do you and what do your organization do? How do you help to overcome this disconnect from the will of the people and the interests of the voters and the legislation? What are some of these steps that you think can be done to help address that?
I mean, really, it's investing in state legislative candidates and letting them go out there and, just kind of go to the people. And, the next big test is in Virginia. They have, 2025 statewide elections. Right now, the Democratic gubernatorial candidate is favored. But Democrats only have a one-seat majority in the state house, which is, all 100 seats are up in November. And if we can, there's a lot of, I think there might be either around like 8 or 9 Republican delegates there who seats that Kamala Harris carried. Mm-hmm. And so if you can if you can defeat, a lot of Republicans there and show Republicans nationwide, hey, the people aren't going to stand up for the side of extremism anymore, hopefully that can send a message nationwide. Hopefully that can kind of have them reconsider this race to the right and maybe, at the very least, drop the worst parts of their agenda and maybe try to govern more for the people that, they're actually supposed to represent.
This is really interesting and really helpful to kind of understand these dynamics. I want to thank Aaron Kleinman, who is the Director of Research at the State's Projects, for joining us. If you want to learn more, you can go to thestateprojects.org and learn all about the organization, their research efforts, and how you can get involved. Thank you so much, Aaron, for taking some time with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to be right back with Mike Nellis, who's a Democratic consultant on WCPT.
Stephanie Miller.
My personal comedy Jesus.
People are standing up. We're seeing it all over the place. This 21-year-old girl in Colombia who sued the Trump administration because they tried to Mahmoud Khalil her, and they backed down. Jeffrey Goldberg is doing this, and they're backing down. People are showing up to vote in special elections. Guys, these guys are so beatable, and they're messy, and they're sloppy, and they're dumb. Let's keep it up.
We love you, Tom Fugelsang.
Stephanie Miller, weekday mornings, 8 to 11 on WCPT 820.
Greece is cheap.
But the airfare costs a fortune.
Paris?
Not much closer, and again, airfare...
What about Puerto Vallarta?
Let's face it, flying anywhere is just too expensive.
Wait, what's this? Low-cost airlines.
With one call to low-cost airlines, you'll drastically slash your travel costs. We're talking insanely low airline prices to any of your favorite destinations. Where would you like to go? London, Rome, Costa Rica, Australia?
Wow, that's cheap.
So why wait? Call now to learn how crazy cheap it is to fly anywhere in the U.S. or international. Our prices are so low, we can't publish them. The only way to get them is to call to instantly hear the most amazing best deals on airline travel. It's that easy. So call now and start packing.
800-708-3091. 800-708-3091. 800-708-3091. That's 800-708-3091.
Alexa, play WCPT.
WCPT from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
We are back and joined by Mike Nellis, who is a former senior advisor to Kamala Harris and founder and CEO of Authentic, a Chicago-based political fundraising and consulting firm. And our listeners will certainly remember him from this past Wednesday when he filled in for Joan and just did a fantastic job. Hey, Mike, thanks for coming back and sharing some insights with us.
Thanks for having me back. How's your run at hosting today?
It's a lot. This gets addicting, Mike. I kind of enjoy it.
Is this your first time, or do you do this a lot?
No, this is number 11 for me. So now it sort of feels a little bit more normal. This last Wednesday, was that your first?
Yeah, that was my very first time.
My first time, everything moved really, really fast. It was hard to stay on top of some of the details. So it does all slow down a little bit.
I told Lady B I was going to try not to burn the whole station down.
That's a good goal. Good to have goals like that.
Yeah, that's right.
So, hey, I want to start with a big picture, and specifically where you think the Democratic Party should focus its attention, and in particular, how you balance an us versus them focus, or maybe I should say an us versus him focus. Like, do you focus on what Democrats stand for, what they believe in, or do you instead focus a majority of your attention on Donald Trump, who for all of his electoral success is arguably the most flawed politician in the history of the country? How do you understand that balance?
So I think you have to take the fight to Donald Trump right now. And the reason you have to take that fight is, one, the severity of the things that he is doing and the consequences of those actions on the daily lives of the American people is profound, all right? Yeah. Many, many Americans who were already struggling in this last election, a lot of whom who voted for him because they were crying out for help and they didn't think the Democratic Party was listening to them, are now seeing it be harder to put food on the table, harder to pay for their rent. They don't see any path to retire with dignity or start a family. And so we have to focus everything there. I think the biggest mistake the Democratic Party has made, and there's a lot of them, is we have gotten far away from actually delivering meaningful, actionable difference in people's lives. And yes, we've got to take the fight to Donald Trump. We got to stop the worst that we can. We got to earn back people's trust and get back into power. And when we do, we got to deliver for them. So Donald Trump is going to capture all the attention that he's going to want, no matter what we do. 100%. There's nothing we can do to stop that. He has the power of the bully pulpit, and he understands how to use that effectively. But what we can do is hijack that. And in the moments where he hurts you, where he's dismantling health care through Medicaid for millions of people, where he's taking away food stamp access for people, where he's making everything more expensive with these tariffs, we go, hey, it doesn't have to be this way. We're sorry this is happening to you. We're sorry that you've been lied to. And we're here, and we're going to fight for you whether you voted for our candidate or not.
I like that. Do you see any candidates out there right now that are doing a good job of that? I mean, would you point to some who've been more successful than others in terms of embracing that type of message?
Yeah, I'll shout out a couple. So the first candidate that I think is doing a great job is Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan.
Yeah.
I think she's doing an amazing job just by doing her job, which feels like such a novel thing. But let's compare it to like what Gavin Newsom is doing right now. So Gavin Newsom is spending most of his time, at least his public time, launching a podcast and losing debates to Charlie Kirk.
Yeah.
Not a useful not a useful run at his time, in my opinion. But Gretchen Whitmer's out there. She's saving military bases. She saved 30,000 jobs in a small community by working with Donald Trump, not endorsing what he's doing, but working with him. And then on top of that, she got a disaster relief for victims of these horrible, winter storms in northern Michigan. They were without power and they were at risk. And so that's showing that the Democratic Party, that our leaders can deliver actionable differences. So that's number one. Number two is I'll give Cory Booker a lot of credit right now. I thought that 25-hour filibuster was super important, both to show that the Democratic Party can fight, but let's talk about the way that he chose to fight. He didn't show up with the phone book and start reading out different people's names. He didn't show up with a deck of playing cards and the rules on how you play pinochle. He was talking about he was sharing all these letters from people who were his constituents who were talking about what it meant to lose their health care, what all this chaos and instability meant for their jobs and their careers and their businesses. And that's the right way to do it. Elevate and tell the stories of people who are being impacted, and you do that right. One more thought here, too, is Pete Buttigieg. There's another one who's doing this right. Pete has always been good at doing exactly what a lot of Democrats refuse to do, which is to go into uncomfortable spaces and have difficult conversations. Pete always goes on Fox News. It's always really smart. Last week or the week before, he went on Flagrant, one of those right-wing kind of, bro podcasts. I wouldn't even call Flagrant right-wing. It's probably just like median male voter kind of thing. And he went on, and he was there for 3.5 hours, and he talked about everything from personal stuff, like what it meant to be in the military, what it means to be gay in America. He was talking about transportation, and he really won those guys over. But most importantly, he created a different impression of what the Democratic Party is and looks like after 4 years where we didn't have that. So those are the three that I'm looking at right now.
That's really interesting. And I totally agree with you on Newsom. It feels to me that Newsom with his podcast that he's playing the Trumpian game. And that strikes me as a losing game for Democrats, right? You have to try a different strategy. And Buttigieg was interviewed the other day, and he was making some of the same points that you were suggesting just right now, that the Democrats need to go out and talk about who they are. And that's a compelling message, and not shy away from that. And again, you can talk about Trump, but it's also about selling who you are, and he seems particularly good at that, right? I mean, he is a good vessel for engaging in those kind of conversations.
I think Pete Buttigieg is one of our best talkers in the Democratic Party, but he's also one of the most fearless because he's willing to go on Fox News and hold them accountable for the silly lies they tell about Democrats. Again, Lady B, I'm going to try not to curse on your air and get in trouble. So I went 3 hours. I think I can go 20 minutes now and do it. But
she's smiling.
She's smiling good. I felt it. I think that the mistake that a lot of Democratic strategists make is that they spend so much time focused on the last election and how to win the last election. Yeah. They're not thinking about how to win the next election. And we've got elections coming up in 2025, statewide in Virginia and New Jersey for governor. We've got midterm elections in 26, and then we've got a very chaotic Democratic and Republican primary situation in 2027. Yeah. The terrain of those elections will be very different than the one that was just decided last November. So let's try to think about what the path forward looks like. Again, stop as much as we can of what's happening. Democrats have virtually no power in Washington. That's the way that it is. System of government sucks when you're locked out.
Yep.
So we can stop or slow down what we can. We can use the courts. I think the Democratic attorneys generals are doing an amazing job of trying to stop as much as they can with the Supreme Court that's frankly rigged against them. But let's think through where voters are going to be 4 years from now and how we deliver for them. And I think, is 4 years from now, is anybody going to care about Gavin Newsom having Steve Bannon on his podcast? No. But what it signifies is who's doing the work for the American people, because I think 4 years of chaos is going to lend to a lot of Americans being very frustrated with the style of leadership and looking for a grown-up who can get stuff done. Because we have not accomplished a lot, certainly not enough for the American people, Democrat or Republican, in the last 10 years.
Sure.
And a political system, an economy, a cultural, societal setup that lends itself to elect Donald Trump not once but twice is not healthy. And we have to recognize that the system has to be fixed. And I think guys like Pete Buttigieg get that. I think Gretchen Whitmer gets that. I think Cory Booker gets that.
That's a really interesting take. One of the things we learned about 2024 is that the Trump campaign benefited dramatically from its focus on race, sex, and trans rights. I remember being up in Wisconsin and just the nonstop anti-trans ads that the Trump campaign ran. I mean, It was overwhelming. It was fear-mongering at its best or worst. This is one area that the Democrats need to be better on, right? And so how do you confront this type of attack? What's the best strategy for doing that?
Yeah, I'd add a couple of thoughts here. The first is, one, I don't want to see the Democratic Party abandon anybody. I think all the elected officials on the Democratic side that are saying we have to abandon the trans community are ridiculous. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I do think we have to acknowledge the way we've approached talking about these issues doesn't make sense to people, and we have not done a very good job of defending ourselves and, by the way, standing up for trans kids who are being bullied.
Yep.
That's ultimately what this is. Let's be very clear. Republican commentators on Fox News and Piers Morgan and on X are bullying trans kids to score cheap political points, period. Every kid deserves to be loved. Every kid deserves connection. Every kid deserves an opportunity to thrive and play with their friends. That's what I want for them. Now, do we need to be smarter about how we do this? Yes, and I think here's how I would frame it. Instead of letting the federal government make decisions on who should or shouldn't play women's volleyball, that's something that local communities should decide. So bring together parents, students, coaches, experts in the community, figure out the right way to do it. And that does mean at a certain level, like some communities are going to make one decision, other communities are going to make another. But we eliminate democratic federalist society. That's probably the way that it should work. And I'm old enough to remember when all of the Republican Party was the party of small government.
Yep.
That the party, we got to get the government out of our decisions. Government shouldn't be making these decisions for us. Well, apparently the government needs to be big enough to tell a woman what she can or cannot do with her body and whether or not she has to keep a baby that she may or may not want. We're telling trans kids who can or can't play basketball. So that doesn't make any sense to me. So I'd rather try to reframe it back to what is the role of the government? How do we make sure that everybody is loved and that nobody gets bullied?
Thank you, Mike, for your time and insights. I wish we gotta have you back on. We gotta have this conversation again because I think this is really, really interesting, and I so enjoy picking your brain. So we've been talking with Mike Nellis, who's a former senior advisor at Kamala Harris and founder and CEO of Authentic, a Chicago-based political fundraising and consulting firm, and a guest host on WCPT. Thanks so much for your time, Mike.
Thanks for having me. Good luck with the rest of the show.
Appreciate it. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Gal Beckerman talking about the role of morality in U.S. foreign policy on WCPT.
Think Theory Radio.
Dr. Hande Ozdinler, she is a neuroscientist, but also an artist.
It seems as the larger we go, the galaxy, the sky, and then also as small as we go, right? The nanostructures, the atomic interactions or cellular interactions. There is so much resemblance, there is a secret or there is an unspoken symmetry.
Think Theory Radio with Damian Perdue. Saturdays at 6 p.m. on WCPT 820.
William is one of millions of Americans who uses GoodRx to save on the cost of their prescriptions.
My oldest daughter, Camilla, 2 days old, she had to have open heart surgery. All of a sudden, she's on 5 different medications. It adds up at the end of the month. Me and the pharmacist got so tight. She said, GoodRx save you a lot of money. Saving that extra $200-300 a month. We're able to do all these extra activities, so it puts less stress on our household, and it puts less stress on our pockets.
Download the free app or visit GoodRx.com and start saving today. GoodRx user compensated for their time. GoodRx is not insurance, but can be used instead of insurance.
This is a WCPT moment in labor. When Serena Williams won her title at the Tennis Grand Slam tournament, we know she gets the same prize money as her male counterpart. However, prior to 1973, that wasn't always the case. When Billie Jean King captured her first Wimbledon title in 1966, she was surprised to find out that the winner of the men's tournament received £2,000, while she only received £750. After being unable to find any tournaments for women, King and 8 other women formed their own tournament, the Virginia Slims Invitational, where each woman was paid $1 before posing for the famous picture of them each holding up their dollar, with the caption, "Contract Pros." While the move was bold, the pay discrepancies continued. King threatened to boycott the 1973 U.S. Open unless the women were paid the same as the men. Thanks to a grant from Band Deodorant, both the men and women's singles would take home $25,000. Despite the progress at the U.S. Open, it wouldn't be until 1984 that the Australian Open would execute equal pay, followed by the French Open in 2006, and finally Wimbledon in 2007. This has been a WCPT moment in labor. We're fighting for your rights.
Stop feeling embarrassed about thinning hair and start looking and feeling your best with Hair Grow by New Nordic. Available online at Amazon, Walmart.com, and NewNordicUSA.com, or at your local CVS.
AP News, I'm Ben Thomas. Ahead of weekend trade talks, President Trump's floating a tariff cut for China. Sakar Magani has details.
The president's looking to de-escalate the trade war between the world's 2 biggest economies. Right now, he has a 145% tariff on China, a number his trade team acknowledges is unsustainable, given that effectively is an embargo on any trade between the 2 nations. Yesterday,
you can't get any higher. It's at 145, so we know it's coming down.
Today, he writes on social media, an 80% tariff seems right, and it'll be up to his Treasury chief, who will be among the negotiators in Switzerland. That would be a significant reduction, but still a a very high import tax that could push prices higher. The Post is another sign the president's essentially publicly negotiating tariffs with himself, constantly reversing his stance. Sagar Meghani, Washington.
Stocks closed mixed to end an unusually quiet week. The S&P slipped 0.1% on the day, winding up with a loss of 0.5 for the week. The Dow fell 119 points, or about 0.3, while the Nasdaq Composite was little changed. Air traffic controllers at Newark Airport lost radar again early this morning, the second time in 2 weeks, this time for about 90 seconds. A federal judge in Vermont has released Rumeysa Ozturk. The Tufts University student from Turkey had been detained in a Louisiana immigration center for more than 6 weeks after being pulled off the street in a Boston suburb. Ozturk had co-written an op-ed in the Tufts Daily last year criticizing the university's response to Israel's war in Gaza.
As we celebrate this morning, I invite you to recognize the marvels that the Lord has done, the blessings that the Lord continues to pour out upon all of us.
Pope Leo XIV addressing cardinals this morning, saying in his first Mass his election is both a cross to bear and a blessing. This is AP News. Celebrations across Europe today mark the victory over Nazism 80 years ago. Charles de Ledesma reports it comes amid fresh worries over Europe's latest war.
Allied in World War II, Russia and Western European powers are now adversaries as they mark 80 years since the surrender of the Nazis. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has divided the continent anew, and the war and its daily death tolls loom large in victory commemorations and events across Europe. Moscow's hosting a massive parade, along with the leaders of China, Brazil and many others, meant to project Russian power, after Britain, France and the US held ceremonies on Thursday. Meanwhile, EU foreign ministers are meeting in Lviv to show support for Ukraine, and a European leaders gathering in Oslo is expected to do the same. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
And I'm Ben Thomas, AP News. Thanks for listening.
This is 8:20 a.m. WCPT Willow Springs and streaming worldwide at WCPT820.com. We are Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter. Now your WCPT 820 weather update.
I'm meteorologist Ray Miller from the Weatherology Weather Center. Clear skies tonight with a low temperature of 47 degrees. On Saturday, we'll see sunshine with a high of 68 and northwest winds at 15 to 30 miles an hour. Sunday, sunshine with a high temperature around 64 and northeast winds at 5 to 10. Monday, sunny with a high of 67. Tuesday, scattered showers and storms with a high of 68. And for Wednesday, a couple of isolated storms with a high of 71 degrees. That's the latest Chicago weather update. Right now, it's 63.
The Thom Hartmann radio program provides all of the intelligence, information, and insight you'll need to win the water cooler wars. Weekdays 11 to 2 right here on WCPT 820, Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter. Chicago's progressive talk, WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to WCPT. We are thrilled to be joined by our next guest, Gul Beckerman, who is a staff writer at The Atlantic. He is the author of the book, The Quiet Before, on the unexpected origin of radical ideas. Before coming over to The Atlantic, Gul was an editor at the New York Times Book Review. His writing has appeared in a number of places over the years, including The Washington Post, The New Republic, and Book Forum. I've invited him here today to discuss his book, as well as his most recent article in The Atlantic titled, Trump is Fulfilling Kissinger's Dreams. Gul, thank you so much for joining us on WCPT.
Thanks for having me.
So I've so been looking forward to talking with you about your recent article in The Atlantic. I will say, I read it and I was like, I got to reach out to this guy and see if he'll talk to me about it. Because you just raised this really, really interesting question of the role of morality in U.S. foreign policy, and specifically the ways in which the Trump administration is sort of jettisoning or discarded morality as a consideration for matters of U.S. foreign policy. Maybe we should begin. Can you just give our listeners an overview of the kind of argument that you develop in this piece?
Sure. Well, among the many moves over the first 100 days of Trump's presidency has been a real attempt to dismantle those parts of the government that have been focused on our sort of idealistic mission in the world, let's say. So if you think about the defunding of USAID, which was, involved in all kinds of projects all over the world, if you look at what's happening at the State Department with getting rid of the departments that deal with human rights or democracy promotion, there's definitely an effort to sort of reduce or ultimately get rid of those parts of the government that are involved in what we call something soft power, projecting America's ideals, America's values to the world. So, noticing this, I thought, well, who else is kind of would be in tune with these ideas? And it occurred to me that Henry Kissinger might be an interesting person to put in conversation with these moves, because he very much, his political philosophy, his diplomatic philosophy, sort of excluded morality from the picture. He was about sort of building alliances with countries, a kind of transactionalism. Transactionalism is a word that we hear a lot these days, that sort of left those sort of moral questions to the side.
Yes. So I want to think about both the similarities and the differences between Trump and Kissinger, because you highlight both in the piece. And as your title suggests, there are some important similarities between the two. And I think it makes for, like you just said, a really fascinating comparison. In some ways, they couldn't be more different. Kissinger was a student of history and devoted his life to studying and trying to understand the world. By contrast, Trump rejects expertise and has little interest in history. Yet they both share the skepticism of using morality as a guidepost for U.S. foreign policy. Walk me through some of the ways in which you see those similarities playing out.
Yeah, well, I think so. If I went and I talked to some Kissinger experts, and they basically said what Kissinger would love about the first 100 days is, he'd be happy to see that the emphasis had shifted from ideals to power, to how America can use its power in the world. And that was very much sort of that's a Kissingerian idea, that as the biggest power, the most military might, and the biggest market, America has an opportunity to sort of make the changes that it wants in the world. And that is very much a Trumpian idea as well. Now, in terms of the differences, they have different motives for putting aside moral issues or values for the sake of pursuing that exercise of power. Kissinger had a kind of an ethical framework of a sort, which was that he felt that the most important thing was to maintain stability in the world. He thought there had to be a certain kind of balance of powers. So, you would sort of compromise on human rights, let's say, to arrive at, détente, a kind of a cold peace with the Soviet Union, because that would reduce the chances of, say, a nuclear war, right? So that's him thinking, let me sort of ignore some of these, the do-gooder, the annoyances that he's hearing from all the do-gooders and the NGOs and the UN even, the organizations in the world that are trying to get into adhere to certain sort of moral principles, because he had sort of this bigger thought, which is, I need to kind of keep the world in a stable place. So that is sort of transactionalism with a real distinct purpose and goal, you could say. I think what we're seeing now, as far as we can tell, from the first 100 days, is a kind of a transactionalism all the way down, so to speak. I don't. It's about exercising power for power's sake, about sort of getting what America can from the world. And I'm not sure, given some of the kind of instability that we've seen, particularly with the tariffs policies, which, I think Kissinger would have really thrown up his hands and said, what are you doing? To that, we see a different kind of impulse, not necessarily one that is guided by this sort of larger idea of maintaining calm and peace throughout the world.
This is really interesting. In some ways, I think the differences are even more fascinating. Maybe push a little bit deeper here. So, and you're right. You write that Kissinger, that he rejected, his rejection of morality was largely because, as you wrote, he saw it as a bothersome obstacle, right, to this overriding goal of stability and the avoidance of nuclear war. And I would say those are legitimate and some might suggest morally significant goals. So, as hard as we are on Kissinger, and I think much of that criticism is warranted, at least he had some foundation that we could understand as an ethical vision. You talked about that with Trump, it's a different place. And you said it's transactionalism all the way down. Tell me what that means for the idea or the role of morality in U.S. foreign policy, because that's another step. It's beyond Kissinger.
Yeah, it really is. I think one of the kind of the more chilling pieces of evidence that I found when I was trying to understand the moral vision or the lack of moral vision in the current administration is this news story that came out of the State Department, which was that, memos had been going around to the many people there who write these human rights reports every year. There's Congress mandates the State Department to write for each country a human rights report. And a memo had gone around sort of essentially telling them to do the very minimum, basically what was required from Congress, to scrub out references to, say, prison abuse or government corruption or, locking up dissidents without due process, these factors that had sort of played a part in previous reports. And it occurred to me just what a shift this was, that if you were a dissident or some kind of persecuted minority out in the world for, since the end of in the entire post-war era, let's say, over the last 80 years, you could know that, in the United States, there was at least this sense that the country was upholding those principles, those ideals, and that there was there was an address for your complaints,
Yeah.
Whether or not anything would be done with them. And certainly past presidents have used, idealism in a kind of a more cynical way to get across their foreign policies. And we can talk about that too, but it always was sort of part of what made America America. And I think specifically for people who need help in the world, there was a sense that there was some place where, I say in the piece there was a hotline, whether or not anybody would do something with information. You knew there was somebody at the State Department who was sitting there every year tasked with putting together a report who might at the very least record or document or be aware of what was happening in these other places in the world. And that's really not seeming to happen under the Trump presidency. And in fact, some of these sort of erasures in these reports are very much sort of politically motivated, so they give one of the examples in this memo that went around was the report for Hungary, in which is now led by a strongman, Viktor Orban, who is allied with Trump, and in which the section on government corruption was just crossed off, and as a lesson to people in the State Department, this is what we're doing now.
Wow. And, there was always hypocrisy was always sort of built into the United States. But you're right. At least there was somebody at the other end of that phone was making an effort. And that was one of the things that I found so engaging about the article and the piece is that you're offering this macro level look at what's playing out in front of us. And this is a challenge because the Trump administration is overwhelming us. They're flooding. They talk about flooding the zone. So it's difficult to see these connections between all the small actions, many of which connect to these long-standing moral principles of U.S. foreign policy. And, it's, again, rejecting all these. And so the U.S. has many flaws, and it hasn't always lived up to its ideals. Some of my research has looked at covert interventions and what the United States did during the Cold War. And we did lots of awful things, but we felt the urge to at least cover them up, right? We said, we believe in these good things, and when we do bad things, we're going to do them quietly and covertly so people don't criticize us. What do you see as the implications of this shift where that doesn't matter anymore? Where we just say to Viktor Orban, just keep doing what you're doing. We're just going to eliminate the part of the office that writes about that. That strikes me as a really dramatic development.
No, it is. I mean, it is power. It is exercise of power without any sort of attempt to to pretend like it's being used for a greater purpose, besides just showing that we're the strongest. I do think that that is sort of Trump's view of the world. I mean, it sounds kind of simplistic to put it this way, but it's just kind of like dog eat dog, and we're the biggest dog, and people need to listen to us, And so sometimes you use that power, and I mentioned in the piece, when you think about the way Reagan deployed human rights, as a way to make an argument against the Soviet Union, that this was a godless country that was immoral, that had a system that did not care about people. And he used these kind of moralistic, idealistic arguments. It did really help, the dissidents inside the Soviet Union who were fighting against that country. Reagan might have been making the argument for cynical reasons, but at least he was drawing on that language, drawing on those principles, drawing on that place that America was supposed to be in the world. I mean, you can make a similar point about sort of George W. Bush and the justifications he used for the war in Iraq or in Afghanistan. The language about Afghanistan in particular, and women, and giving women a chance the right to vote and the right to live kind of fuller lives than they were under the Taliban. Again, whether or not that was a genuine expression of desire to spread human rights throughout the world, I don't know, but it was definitely in the toolbox. And now I think it's just not relevant. It's just not interesting to Trump and his foreign policy team. It's about what can we get to improve improve and strengthen the place of America in the world and exercise that power.
A dramatic development. We need to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Gall about his book, The Quiet Before, on the unexpected origins of radical ideas. We'll be right back on WCPT.
Stephanie Miller.
Bob Cesca joins us now.
Oh, God, shut down the internet. Can we just shut it down? We just got to unplug it. We need a timeout from the internet.
Yeah.
All of American society. I think, you know what? I say that half jokingly, but the other half is like, yeah. As someone who worked his entire career on the internet, I feel like we just weren't evolved enough. We weren't ready when it came along. Came along way too soon.
Stephanie Miller, weekday mornings 8 to 11 on WCPT 820.
This is a WCPT Moment in Labor. In 2011, 6 Jimmy John's employees in Minneapolis were fired by their franchise-owning company, Mickey Lynn Enterprises, after fighting for paid sick days. This is a common theme in the union-free world of fast food. Over 13 million Americans work in the fast food industry, making an average of $13,500 a year, not even half the average cost of living. 80% of fast food workers have experienced work-related injuries, and only 13% were covered by their employer. A group of employees referred to as the Jimmy John's Six fought for these rights, creating an online campaign, posting a picture of 2 sandwiches saying one of these was made by a healthy employee, the other was made by a sick employee. Can you tell the difference? Too bad, as Jimmy John's workers do not get paid sick days. Help workers win sick days. More than 32 million Americans work a job that does not offer paid sick days. This has been a WCPT Moment in Labor. We're working for your rights.
Because facts matter. You are listening to WCPT 820.
Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back. We're talking with Gall Beckerman, who is a staff writer at The Atlantic. Before the break, we were discussing his latest article in The Atlantic titled, Trump is Fulfilling Kissinger's Dreams. I would like to transition and talk about your latest book, The Quiet Before, on the unexpected origins of radical ideas. Much like the article we just discussed, your book raises and grapples with these really big questions and ideas. And that is, what is the source or origins of revolutionary ideas, these social movements that come along and topple existing social systems, norms, and practices. And you note that we tend to focus on these moments when the crowd organizes in the streets, demanding change. Yet you argue that there's a lot of really important work that goes on, or should go on, well in advance of public protests. You talk about the importance of these quiet spaces where individuals, whether radicals, revolutionaries, whoever they might be, come together and whisper among themselves. They imagine alternative realities and deliberate about how to best achieve their goals. Tell us about the importance of these quiet spaces.
Yeah, well, you described the book really well. Thank you. I became really interested, particularly in our sort of sped up social media world, to understand sort of what forms of communication actually help best incubate, is a word that I use in the book, incubate radical new ideas. Because it occurred to me sort of when I started thinking about this book, which is now, quite a bit ago, that what we were seeing on social media, the sort of protests that type of communication was leading to, meaning, fast, bombastic, attention-grabbing, loud, were sort of shaping the kinds of protests that we had. So in the book I talk about like Tahrir Square, for example, in 2010, Arab Spring, where you had this amazing ability to bring a massive amount of people out into one place, achieving this incredible goal of bringing down the dictator, Hosni Mubarak, in a very short period of time. But then the tools that they needed to actually build up something in his place, to build up a new kind of society, a new kind of a democratic system and culture that hadn't existed there before. They really didn't have any place. This kind of strange motley crew of opposition that came together to bring him down. They didn't have a place to sort of work out their differences, figure out who they were, what kind of society they wanted to create. The medium didn't exist for them to do that. And that is a little bit sort of, where I was motivated, the place I was motivated from to write the book was to say, well, then, if social media is not the best tool for building new radical things, what maybe can the past teach us, sort of the pre-digital past, and the forms of communication that people used in the past tell us about what qualities a medium does need to have. And that led me, the book is, essentially starts in the 16th century, in the scientific revolution and the use of letters, and how letters were the main medium that people began to sort of chip away at orthodoxies, or these sort of concrete, established sense of like how the world works. And I go through, I talk about, all the way to zines in the 90s, third wave feminism, and samizdat, which was underground writing in the Soviet Union. And these were ways that groups of people who had a different way of thinking about, what was possible inside the societies they lived in, these are the means through which they were able to begin to egg one another on, to develop an idea, to try certain things that might fail, to throw out sort of ridiculous notions, like how to make change. But all of that needs to happen. It's a ferment that needs to take place, and it kind of also has to take place a little bit away from the peering eyes of too big of a public. You need people who are really committed, who are sort of inside the tent. There's a lot of conditions that need to take place to create this kind of hothouse that I think is the necessary space for a radical new idea to sort of emerge into the world.
I just love thinking about that, the hard work that has to go in where people are talking and grappling and agreeing and disagreeing. Can you tell our listeners about the Blackout process, a local group within the Black Lives Matter movement engaged in? Because I think that was one of my favorite examples, and it explains how and why that Blackout process was so useful as it related to the ideas of defunding the police.
Yeah, well, so you had this, this kind of came after the first big wave of Black Lives Matter, after Ferguson, and there were groups that felt that they were beginning to mold their own priorities to what they were seeing worked online, right? So. Yeah. It was sort of they were following this kind of booms and busts of whatever hashtags happened to be particularly viral. And it's understandable because, we have these tools that we've never had before where you can reach an enormous number of people. But there's very little thought about how it ends up sort of shaping the type of messages that you have and what you're actually saying. And so you had this group that very smartly, they said, you know what, we're we're not like a big, we don't run a social media company. We're a local activist group who wants to serve our community, and maybe we're not doing the best job of that by just sort of being too online. And so they decided to commit to, I can't actually remember how long it was now, but a number of months of kind of what they called a blackout, where they would all sort of delete their apps and not primarily use social media, but actually go door to door and start talking to people. And the thing that they found, in their communities, this was a group in Florida called the Dream Defenders. And what they found was that, like, most of the, minority, like poor, communities that they were sort of speaking in the name of, they didn't want to get rid of the police. They didn't want to defund the police. They wanted to change the relationship that the community had with the police. They definitely wanted to do that, but they had all kinds of ideas that were much more sort of nuanced in a way than just the notion of defunding the police. And this led to an entire process, where they started to call sort of big meetings where people from the community could come and sort of share ideas. And it led to the group itself sort of becoming a lot more sophisticated and a lot more sort of targeted in how they were using their energies, and not just sort of repeating phrases that riled up a core base, but didn't actually respond to the realities of the people who they were saying that they were serving and trying to help.
They did the hard work. They let the incubation process play out, and they were better for it. I thought that was a really interesting way to connect it to, because you do a wonderful job of going through long arcs of history, with the point being that some of the more modern versions of social media make it difficult. There's sort of an emptiness to all of this, and that's why I liked how you end the book by talking about Hannah Arendt and the example of sitting around a table, right, and having a real conversation around this wooden table where people are talking and engaging in real debate and slamming their hands on the table, right? Like what you can sort of envision real conversation. And I think that's just a wonderful image and metaphor. Now, as you ponder how we use modern technology to replicate us all being around the table, is that possible for social movements today? Because as I look out on the world, there are some really important social movements. There's change that is needed. Is that possible in this new environment?
I think it is, actually. I mean, I think one of the things I started looking at in the book, which is now, 2 years old, so, there's been even, as everything online, there's been advances and different ways that people are using technology. But, I was already investigating in the book, the notion of sort of smaller spaces, WhatsApp groups, limited to a certain number of people that have more of the flavor of conversation than, say, social media, which is about, accumulating likes, right? Mm-hmm. So, I have a sort of what I hoped would be kind of an unsettling chapter in the book about white supremacists, who couldn't use the big, loud social media platform, so they had to use something called Discord, which, is I don't know if listeners know, but it's a sort of a platform that mostly gamers use, but you're able to create these kind of like closed rooms where you have you set your own moderation, and people who aren't playing by the rules can be kicked out, who aren't having the types of conversations you're trying to have, and I was able to kind of peek into some of those spaces, and it was interesting just how much more like conversation it was. The other thing I'd say, that it's been true of the world of protest activism so far in Trump's second term is that it has been remarkably local. Mm-hmm. It has, if you look at something like the 50-51 movement, if you know what this is,
yes.
The whole notion of that movement is premised on the idea that let's not start with a massive 500,000 people protest in Washington D.C. Let's get out the people in your town who maybe it's 50 people or 100 people, but they know which corner they want to go to, or they know what Tesla showroom they're going to.
Yes,
they're going
right.
to. They're going to. I mean, that's the case in my neighborhood in Brooklyn. It does create this different kind of dynamic, right? Because you have sort of the same people showing up to smaller but regular protests. They're local, so there is sort of like it feels a little bit more sort of accessible to folks, and can be tailored to some of the issues that really matter to people in a particular community. I know from talking to the organizers of some of those protests that they do think about how to ramp up, how to build up so that they can have more of an impact on a national scale. But they see the value, which I'm sort of thrilled to hear, of the slow ramping up. Let's create the muscle memory to even do this. I think some of these lessons have been sort of not by virtue of my book, but just by, people have seen the boom and bust cycle. They lived through the Women's March or the Me Too movement or even, Black Lives Matter, which had its kind of cultural impact, but some of the real specific things people wanted to achieve didn't get achieved. So there's a sense that, like, you have to have movements that don't just mimic the virality of a hashtag online. They need to be able to build structure and kind of lasting elements for them.
It's about bringing those ancient tools to the modern technology, which is exciting to see some of that play out. Well, we need to let you get back to your day, but I'm so grateful for you spending some time with us. We've been speaking with Gal Beckerman, who's a staff writer at The Atlantic and author of the book The Quiet Before, on the unexpected origins of radical ideas. Thank you so much for joining us, Gal.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with Dr. Suzanne Chod on WCPT.
When it comes to the vitamins and supplements you take, quality counts. If you have questions or concerns about the vitamins you plan on taking, we're happy to help. Mark Drugs, better health and care for you and your pets. The most common signs you need a probiotic are if you have taken an antibiotic and need to balance out the gut bacteria, you find yourself getting constantly sick, or you feel bloated, unwell, or have skin issues. We carry high-quality probiotics at our pharmacies, such as Florastor, Floragen, and what I refer to as the silver bullet, Orthobiotic, which combines multiple strains of beneficial bacteria and friendly yeast to stimulate optimal gut flora. Get to know your pharmacist. Caring for you, your family, and your overall well-being is what our pharmacists at Mark Drugs stand for. You have a choice when it comes to your health care, and a great choice is Mark Drugs in Roselle and Deerfield, where you get better health and care for you and your pets. Check out markdrugs.com for the pet of the month.
I'm Jessica Ettinger, CNBC. A mixed day for stocks today on Wall Street, but only slightly. And the markets have capped off a losing week. This all ahead of weekend U.S.-China trade talks in Switzerland. The Dow fell today 119 points, 0.33%. Amgen shares led it lower. They were down more than 2%. The S&P 500 index in the red, down 4 points. The NASDAQ was in the green, but only 0.75 point higher. Companies whose shares hit fresh all-time highs today include Monster Beverage. By Monday, investors will be evaluating the tariff situation with China. Nobody expects a trade deal this weekend or even a framework for one. Now, the first newly tariffed goods at a higher rate from China have started reaching the U.S. in West Coast ports. Jessica Ettinger, CNBC.
Hear the CNBC business updates each weekday at 9:30, 12:30, and 4:30. Now, your WCPT 820 Chicago weather update.
I'm meteorologist Ray Miller from the Weatherology Weather Center. Clear skies tonight with a low temperature of 47 degrees. On Saturday, we'll see sunshine with a high of 68 and northwest winds at 15 to 30 miles an hour. Sunday, sunshine with a high temperature around 64 and northeast winds at 5 to 10. Monday, sunny with a high of 67. Tuesday, scattered showers and storms with a high of 68. And for Wednesday, a couple of isolated storms with a high of 71 degrees. That's the latest Chicago weather update. Right now, it's 64.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Because that's how we roll. Welcome back to WCPT. Before we get to our next guest, let me remind everybody that tonight on Driving It Home with Patty Vasquez, she will be joined by Dr. Steve Fouts, founder of Teach Different, a group that certifies teachers in a powerful neuroscience-based discussion technique that remakes classrooms into spaces where students ask big questions, listen with empathy, and speak with confidence. Also, Chef Uzma Sharif, who's owner and chocolatier at Chocolate Uzma, and Skip Griparis, a singer, guitarist, and impressionist. That's Driving It Home with Patty Vasquez, weekdays from 5 to 7 p.m. on WCPT 820. All right, we are now joined by my colleague and one of the smartest people I know about American politics, and that is Professor Suzanne Chod from North Central College. Welcome back, Suzanne.
Oh, you are so kind, Bill. Thank you for having me.
When I was saying the smartest person, Lady B was shaking her head, though she's in agreement too. So
y'all are kind. Keep it going. Keep it coming. Right. I'll take that on a Friday. Yeah.
So, I was messaging you yesterday, asking you what you thought we should talk about, and you said Congress. We need to talk about Congress and the specific ways in which this Congress, this Republican Congress, is ceding its constitutionally mandated power, especially as it relates to issues of oversight. So tell me, what are you thinking about that writ broad?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's getting, a lot of attention because Congress seems to be rolling over, even in the face of blatantly unconstitutional action by the executive. And there's, everything's on fire and bells and alarms and all the things. And they should be, right? They absolutely should be. But as I was texting you about, and I often talk about in my classes, is that this is not a new phenomenon in terms of Congress ceding authority to the executive. This has been happening for over 100 years. And it's just now, though, the difference is that it's the oversight feature where Congress had continually dipped in even when they had ceded other types of authority to the executive. But now they're ceding the oversight authority in the face of these wildly unconstitutional actions. And so I think that's, for me, the thing that is lost a bit in the conversation. It's not the ceding of authority. It's the ceding of this particular type of authority that the framers were so intent on Congress having.
Well, tell me a little bit more. Why is that so important? Why did the founders think that was so important? And why, as you look at this today, are you so troubled by it?
Yeah, I mean, some of this goes back, take a little history lesson. Back in one of the callers earlier was talking about this, that, there's sort of the visual thing of the Constitution. If we think about Article 1 is the congressional article and Article 2 is the presidential article. So just the order of the articles of the Constitution demonstrate the framers' mindset that Congress had to have the most authority. In fact, it had so much authority, it had to be split into two chambers, right? I mean, that was part of the reason why we have two chambers of Congress, although, no, of course, not all of the reason. And that there had to be very specific things that Congress did in order to ensure that the body that was most closely representative of and elected by the people was in charge of the most important things. And that the president was supposed to be like a clerk to Congress, right? Secondary for sure, and not at the head of the table, so to speak, in terms of policy and especially domestic policy. And so when Article 2 was drafted, the framers made it very short and didn't give the president a lot of express powers. But the problem with not saying what the president can do is it doesn't say what he can't. And so this expansion of presidential power, not authority, constitutional authority to the office, presidential power, is really, if I'm being honest, the framers' fault and my favorite founding father, Madison's fault, for not being more specific about what the president can't do. And so that's where Congress comes in with its oversight authority, right, to ensure that the president can't expand in the way that this president in particular has expanded. And so that had never been an issue really in terms of congressional oversight until now.
So talk to me about some specific examples of this. Are you thinking about like the Trump effort to defund and dismantle USAID? Does this relate to the Department of Education? Is this where we're thinking about federal funding for colleges and universities? Is this the area where Congress would be justified in exercising that oversight?
Oh, yeah. I mean, all of the things you mentioned, and part of this, I will say, some of this is Congress's fault, insofar as Congress has ceded its power in certain ways over time over things like tariffs, over the budget, right? There are and giving the executive branch the authority to write the rules of implementation of law. I mean, there's things that Congress has done over time, over the last century, that has given the president more power in areas that are right in front of our face right now, right? And so in some ways, that's Congress's fault. The tariff issue, part of that is Congress's fault, right?
Yes.
But the things that, and I love to blame Congress. I love Congress. They're misunderstood, but I also love to blame them when they deserve it. But the things that you're mentioning here about, defunding colleges and universities, taking away tax-exempt status, using the Alien Act of 1798, these things that are written into the Constitution as authority vested in Congress. This would be when Congress would have been screaming, and there'd be committee hearings, and there'd be depositions, there would potentially be subpoenas, and there'd be a widespread media campaign about how Congress is being completely overrun by an overzealous, out-of-control demagogue. And the opposite of that is happening right now.
And we have seen moments in history where Congress has done that. Like, as you were talking, I was thinking about, during the Clinton era, where, Congress felt like it was every single day doing something, whether it was foreign policy-wise or domestic. Like, Congress really asserted itself, and we are seeing the exact opposite now.
Yeah, and what I'll note as you were saying that is that there's a difference between oversight that is warranted based on executive action and what the framers had in mind in terms of congressional oversight. And then there is, the Newt Gingrich Republicans of the 1990s and early 2000s going after Bill Clinton for sneezing, right? Like he stepped out of the West Wing and all of a sudden there's some kind of investigation, right? So there's oversight that's warranted. And then because of increased polarization, and not just polarization, but this calcification, that anything a president does where the opposite party controls Congress, they can scream congressional oversight even when it's not warranted, which I think is some of why Trump is able to get away with it, because we don't really know. It's like the boy who cried wolf at this point. We don't really know what requires oversight and what doesn't, except like we do, because we see what the president's doing right now.
Sure. So this question, you hear this term used a lot lately, impoundment, right? That what Trump is trying to do is impound funds that have been authorized, right? Yeah. Authorized by Congress, signed by the president. It's a done deal. And he's now saying, I don't think I want to do that, right? I'm going to pull back this funding, whether it's foreign aid or whether it's research funding. Can he do that, right? Can the president say,
no.
Okay, explain why not?
Yeah, no, this is like one of the easiest. This is one of the places where, again, Congress would have such an easy time pushing back, right? So if I just take a little back in history, that it was up until the 1920s where Congress was solely in control of the budget, right? So obviously that a lot of that's written into the Constitution, but some of it has sort of been norms over time. But anyway, Congress was solely in control of the budget process. But it wasn't until 1921 that the president got involved, where he would submit his own budget to Congress, and then the sort of back and forth between the branches and sometimes between parties would happen, and then one bill would have to emerge from Congress, and the president would sign it, and that would be the budget. But the problem with all of this, of course, comes to a head with Nixon, where Nixon decides in the 1970s, this spending conflicts with my policy priorities, and so we're not going to release that money. Sounds incredibly familiar to what's happening right now. Yeah. So the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974 gets passed that basically says the president cannot do this. That if Congress has allocated funds passed by the budget, and it's Congress's authority to allocate the funds, the president cannot say those funds will no longer be allocated. This is against the law.
We have all of these
plain and simple.
Yeah, no, that's right. We have all these conversations about whether we have reached a constitutional crisis, and and I think there are many scholars who say, like, well, until he doesn't openly defy the Supreme Court, we're not there. But then I think about this example, right? The law is very clear. If Donald Trump wants to impound something, that law created the impoundment law, created a process where he can petition that to Congress. He's not doing that. He's just blatantly violating that. And this strikes me as another example of why we are firmly in a constitutional crisis. And I think we're trying to sane wash all of this and say that it's not as bad as it really is.
And I think that I think you're so right. And I think part of the issue, and you and I have talked about this before, and the Democrats have backed off in this language a little bit, which I think is probably useful, although frustrating, is the more and more that the Democrats scream about how we're in a constitutional crisis, the less and less it resonates. Again, it's almost like the boy who cried wolf.
Yeah,
like, what is even a constitutional crisis at this point, right? So I think that I understand why they kind of backed off of the language, and so to some extent that makes sense. But it doesn't negate the issue that right now we have a president who is violating existing law, who is arguably bucking Supreme Court orders, and has support of everybody in Congress and his party right now, and the media, and maybe because of his immunity, because the Supreme Court passed the Supreme Court case last year, also has immunity from a court that's very favorable towards his actions. And so what's going to stop him from continuing to sink us further into a crisis?
Ooh, we need to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more about that and kind of think about how the Democrats may respond as we get closer to the midterms and these other levers of power that might be able to push back against Trump and the administration. So we'll be right back on WCPT.
Excuse me, miss. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Can you recommend a bank that offers a full suite of commercial banking products along with excellent service?
Yes, ABOC.
What about a bank that has been in Chicago for more than 100 years and really understands the local business climate?
ABOC.
But I manage a labor union. Can you recommend a bank that really understands how labor unions operate and what banking products they need?
Again, ABOC. ABOC first opened its doors in downtown Chicago in 1922 and understands the local business climate better than anyone. ABOC was founded by labor unions and still has union employees and shareholders today. So they really understand how unions tick and how their needs may be different. But whether you're with a labor union or another type of business, whether you're large or small or something in between, ABOC will always make you feel like you're their most important customer. Visit ABOC.com to learn more.
Wow, thank you, random person on the street. I'm going to visit ABOC.com today.
Member FDIC.
Workdays can be unpredictable, but your workwear shouldn't be. With the Cintas Apparel Plus program, you'll have freshly laundered garments for everyone on your team delivered every week. Cintas has workwear for just about any job imaginable, with high-performance fabrics and an uncompromising fit that stretches and moves with you. Don't leave looking and feeling good to chance. Visit Cintas.com.
Oh, I'm ready!
And get ready for the workday.
Hey Google, play WCPT.
Streaming Chicago's progressive talk from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to WCPT. Before we get back to chatting with Dr. Suzanne Chod, I just want to remind everybody that I'll be in for Joan again on Monday, and my guest will be Daniel Horning, who is the former deputy director of the National Economic Council under Joe Biden, Ross Harrison, who's a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute and professor at the University of Pittsburgh, Alan Lightman, who's a novelist, essayist, and physicist and educator, as well as Ezra Levin, who's the co-executive director of Indivisible. So I think we've got a really, really exciting lineup for Monday. All right, Suzanne, I want to keep talking about Congress. The next question I have for you is thinking forward. Let's say we get to the midterms and the Democrats get the House back. And, it sounds like the Senate is much more of a challenge. But if the Democrats do take over the House of Representatives, what powers might they have? What sort of levers of power could they exercise to overcome some of these challenges? What would be available to them?
Well, I think in any other circumstance, I would say all the things available to them would work. But in these circumstances, unfortunately, I don't know if any of the things that they actually have at their disposal are going to work because the president doesn't really seem to care. So let's say that they're able to get the House back. Even if that happened, we know that their margin of majority would be incredibly small, right? I mean, that's just sort of where we've been in the last 15 years or so, is that maybe a little bit less than that the majority has like 7-4 votes, perhaps, right? Yeah. Which means they need strict party discipline. And what I would say, though, is that what's going to get the Democrats the House back is going to be strict party discipline across the next 18 months, right, until we get there. And so the hope would be, in some ways, this is what Newt Gingrich did when the Republicans took back the House in the 1990s for the first time in 40 years, was to get everybody to say the same thing at the same time, all the time, for a consistent message across the country about this is what our party stands for. And it fundamentally changed the Republican Party in ways that we're seeing now. This is incredibly difficult for the Democrats because they're such a heterogeneous constituency. And so to have a consistent party message is just more challenging for the Democrats. But honestly, it's the only thing that's really, I think, that's going to get them the majority. So then once they're there, because it'll be such a slim majority, they're going to have the rank and file members and leadership are going to have to be on the same page. And they're basically just going to have to block everything they possibly can. And they're going to have to pass things in the House, knowing they're going to get stopped in the Senate, but pass things that they know are widely popular with the American people. And we know what these things are. And we also know that this might be hard for some of our more progressive Democrats to get on board with. But I really think that what they're going to be able to do is quite limited with a Republican Senate and with a president who doesn't really care about Congress in general. But really, they're setting themselves up for 2028.
That's interesting, right? So they're really thinking long ways in advance. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, there have been a lot of comparisons recently between FDR's first 100 days and Donald Trump's first 100 days. And both, were very, very active. But what's important, an important distinction here is that FDR was passing legislation, whereas Trump is really not passing legislation. He's just going to his desk and writing executive orders. And so as we think about if the Democrats do get the House back, Trump seems indifferent to Congress already, right? I mean, he seems to be ruling by executive order. So does that complicate and limit the Democrats' ability to sort of rein him in?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what the best thing that can happen is that the Democrats get the House back, which means that that there's not going to be unified government with Republicans, even if Congress is going to do anything, right? And Trump was going to rely on Congress to do anything, is that they couldn't, right? And so then what the Democrats can do is that they can, with party discipline, pass as much legislation as possible, knowing that it's going to pretty much fail in the Senate, but also could be passing legislation that puts Republicans in the Senate in a really precarious situation to vote against it if those senators are up for re-election in 2028. And all of this is going to be playing out. But President Trump has no interest in the party reputation or no interest in his co-partisans in Congress. And so he's not going to do the Republicans in Congress any favors, as the Democrats, I would argue, have the upper hand in all of this. And what I think would be most interesting, depending on how things go with the Supreme Court in the next few months, is whether or not the president engages in more unconstitutional behavior because the Democrats in Congress are actually in the majority in the House to pass some things. And that could plunge us even further into a crisis, which is terrible for the country, but really good for the Democrats.
Sure. No, that makes sense, right? I mean, okay, so along those lines, I can't not pick your brain about the polling, right? And the polling for this administration is just awful. Trump is supposed to be in the what we call the honeymoon phase of his presidency, and he's underwater on every issue, even the issues people traditionally have had the most faith in him, immigration and the economy. So what do we make of a president and presidency that is this unpopular this early in their tenure?
Yeah. So I'd say two things about this. One is that the honeymoon period for presidents really doesn't exist anymore. Since we have been in this era of increased polarization and in this era of calcification, the last president really to have a sustained honeymoon period was Bill Clinton in his first term. And even George W. Bush, his honeymoon period was short, although, of course, he had the spike with 9/11, but then that was super fleeting. And even Barack Obama had a relatively short honeymoon period. And Biden didn't have one, and Trump the first time, and now this time did not. So I think we're out of the era of a honeymoon period, which typically we would see a president get some wins quickly, right? But I think the second part of that is part of the reason that he's so underwater on all of the things is because the polling we really need to be looking at is what is splitting it up by party, right? And so Republicans still overwhelmingly agree with everything that he's doing. But what's interesting, the polling I'm looking at that is getting some attention but not very much, is where he fits with independents. So I will take this to my grave as a political scientist who studies elections for the rest of my life, is that where independents go, so goes an election. And independents broke for Trump in this election, but didn't break for him and Biden, and so on and so on and so on. And so this is good news for the Democrats if independents are breaking away. It's just whether they come back to the polls in 26 and in 28. And so as long as the Republican Party still supports what the president is doing, he has no incentive to do anything different, and his co-partisans in Congress have no incentive to do anything different. When the polls start to be shaky for the president with Republicans, I think we have a different conversation.
Interesting. Now, we're talking about, as we look at the economy, Trump appears to be driving the economy into a ditch, and he's very, very unpopular. Everybody talks about the Senate is just untouchable for the Democrats. But if things get bad, if we have an economic crisis and he continues to be as unpopular as he is, does the Senate become a possibility, or is it so sort of structurally difficult for Democrats to get that back that even, with just an awful 2 or 4 years, it's still unlikely?
Yeah. So, I'm an institutionalist, so I love that you said structurally, right?
Yeah.
Because, yes, structurally, the Senate is just more challenging and the map is more challenging. But one of the things, actually, when I was on with Joan a month ago, one of the things that we talked about that I think should be getting more attention now is we need to be thinking about, the Democrats need to be thinking about who's running in the primaries. Like already, we should be thinking about who are they running in the primaries and thinking about the messaging in those races. So who are the Republican senators that are up in 26? How are they polling in their state? How have there been, since that senator's last reelection, how have there been some changes in the state? Because it would have been before the last census, and there's, people coming in and out. And how is the president polling in these places? And the Democrats need to be strategic in who they're going to run in these primaries.
Yeah.
And I think that's the conversation that needs to be happening right now. And so as to the question that you're asking is that if we end up in a recession, which is likely if the things continue to go the way that they are, and the Democrats can message this the right way, then it does open up a possibility for Republicans who are already maybe in unsafe-ish seats or in states where Trump is getting less popular to really make a run for it, so to speak. But it has to be the cherry-picked perfect Democratic candidate in that seat.
That's really, really interesting to think about. That's a long way down the road, but I always learn. Suzanne, thank you so much for joining us. This is Dr. Suzanne Chod, professor of political science at North Central College and regular guest on WCPT. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for your insights.
Thanks, Bill. Have a good weekend.
You too, and happy Mother's Day. And as we wrap up, happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Lady B, happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to my wife, and happy Mother's Day to my mother as well. Love you very much. I will see everybody back on Monday. Chicago, be good. See you then. Bye-bye.
The Sports Cubicle. Commissioner of the American Association of Professional Baseball, Joshua Schaub.
So our players are not playing to develop to make it to the major leagues. They play for the name on the front of their jersey. They play for each other and they play to win. So the style of baseball is completely different. They're literally trying to get guys out. They're literally trying to move runners over. They're trying to win the game. So I just want to note that difference as well.
The Sports Cubicle, Sunday nights, 9 p.m. on WCPT.
When you switch to Progressive, you could save bundling your home and auto. Then you could put that money towards some of the surprisingly more expensive things in life.
May I help you? I just wanted to request a late checkout, please.
Of course. That's $30 per hour for up to 4 hours.
Huh. Okay, but if you can offer a late checkout, then that probably means no one is staying in that room. So if it's empty, maybe I can just stay a few extra hours.
Oh, aren't you adorable?
Life costs a lot, so bundle and you could save with Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company, affiliates, and other insurers. Not available in all states.
With MedGuard Alert, you're never alone. You can connect with medical professionals anywhere, anytime. And now MedGuard is introducing our exclusive new Care Watch. If you need help quickly, use it from anywhere to contact medical professionals. No cell phone required. The Care Watch is not only a life-saving medical alert device, it's a revolutionary health monitoring system that checks your blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen saturation, and much more. And here's the best part. If you have Medicaid, you may qualify to get your Care Watch for free. The Care Watch is only available through MedGuard Alert. Call us right now. We have monitoring programs starting as low as $1 a day. The call is free, activation is free, shipping is free, and no contract is required. Remember, with Medicaid, you may qualify to get your Care Watch for free. Call us to get your Care Watch right now.
800-741-5819. 800-741-5819. 800-741-5819. That's 800-741-5819.
Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs feature helps you stand out and hire fast. Start at Indeed.com/credit.
AP News, I'm Ben Thomas. A Turkish graduate student detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement has been ordered released. Donna Warder has the latest.
More than 6 weeks after Tufts University student Rumeysa Ozturk was taken off a street in Somerville, Massachusetts by ICE agents and sent to a detention center, a federal judge in Vermont Friday ordered Ozturk released from detention in Louisiana. Jesse Rossman is with the American Civil Liberties Union in Massachusetts.
One of the dangers of what we are seeing in the government's behavior in this case is the very strong message it sends to people who are watching that you can be punished by your speech. And what we heard from the court today was confirmation that that is not what we do in this country.
Audio courtesy of WCAX. Last year, Ozturk had written an op-ed criticizing Tufts University's response to Israel's war in Gaza. Ozturk says she suffered 12 asthma attacks while in custody. A doctor said if left in detention, Ozturk's condition could have required